The ink dries slowly in the cool evening air, holding onto words that might never be spoken aloud. In the quiet, fading light of late autumn, the world seems to hold its breath. If you look closely at the softly glowing windows of the wooden houses lining the narrow streets, you can see them. Shadows, delicate and still, cast against the thin, translucent paper of the shoji screens. They are the silhouettes of mothers, of wives, of sisters, sitting in the quiet solitude of their homes. The light from a single lantern casts long, gentle shadows that flicker with the evening breeze. In these quiet rooms, hands are working. They move with a steady, devoted rhythm. A needle pulls a bright crimson thread through a piece of white cotton cloth. Stitch by stitch, knot by knot. Women stand on street corners in the daylight, asking passers-by to add a single knot to the fabric, gathering the warmth and good wishes of a community into a single garment. But now, in the stillness of the night, a mother holds the finished belt in her hands. She traces the tiny red knots with her thumb. It is not armor of iron or steel, but it is the strongest shield she can offer. A quiet prayer, stitched in red, meant to wrap around the waist of a son far away, to keep him warm, to keep him safe. The room is silent, save for the rustle of the wind through the pine trees outside. The house feels vast and empty. The teacups on the table are fewer now. The spaces left behind by the young men who have gone to the sea are heavy with a love that has nowhere to go. Far from these quiet streets, out on the dark and restless waters of the anchorages, the great steel ships rest like sleeping giants under a canopy of stars. The ocean laps gently against the heavy iron hulls, a rhythmic, soothing sound, like the slow breathing of the world. The night air is damp, carrying the sharp, clean scent of salt and the faint, familiar smell of fuel oil. On the wooden decks, young men stand watch. The sea breeze tugs at their collars. They look out across the black water toward the dark shapes of the islands, toward the shores they call home. Some of them are barely out of school, their faces still holding the soft edges of youth. They lean against the railings, wrapped in the quiet camaraderie of shared silence. They do not speak of the grand strategies of admirals. They do not talk of the maps spread out on heavy oak tables in distant rooms. Instead, they think of the smell of rain on the dirt roads of their villages. They remember the sound of a younger brother laughing, or the way the sunlight catches the dust motes in the local shrine. They feel the profound, aching distance between this cold ocean and the warmth of the hearth they left behind. They know, in the quiet, unspoken spaces of their hearts, that the journey ahead is unlike the ones before. There is a weight in the air, a heavy, settling truth that they are sailing into the twilight of something very old and very dear. The golden days are behind them, and what lies ahead is a vast, uncertain shadow. Yet, they stand quietly. They adjust their caps. They share a small, precious cup of hot tea, passing it from hand to hand in the dark, finding comfort in the simple presence of one another. Below the decks, in the narrow, dimly lit compartments filled with the hum of generators and the steady vibration of the ship, sailors sit huddled over small, makeshift desks. The glow of low-wattage bulbs creates a warm, intimate space in the middle of the cavernous steel belly of the ship. Here, in the quiet hours before sleep, they take out their writing boxes. A young sailor carefully pours a few drops of water onto an inkstone. He takes a stick of pine soot ink and rubs it slowly, rhythmically, against the stone. The gentle grinding sound is a meditation, a soothing anchor in the shifting sea. The rich, dark ink pools like night water. He picks up a bamboo brush, the bristles coming to a fine, delicate point. He unrolls a sheet of thin, fibrous rice paper. He pauses, the brush hovering just above the page. What do you write when you know, deep down, that this might be the last time you speak to the people you love? He does not write of his fears. He does not write of the immense, terrifying power of the fleets gathering against them, or the weariness that settles into his bones after days of endless drills. He writes to protect them. He presses the brush to the paper, the black characters flowing smoothly, beautifully, down the page. He writes to his mother, telling her that the weather is mild and that his health is good. He asks if the persimmon tree in the back garden has borne fruit this year. He tells her not to worry, that he is eating well, and that his friends look out for him. A few hammocks away, an older man, a petty officer with lines of weather and worry etched around his eyes, writes to his wife. His hand moves a little slower, the strokes of the brush deliberate and heavy with emotion. He asks her to take care of the children. He tells her to be strong, to guide their son, to be the steady roots of their family tree. He writes, I am doing my duty, but between the elegant black lines, hidden in the spaces of the unsaid, is a profound, echoing goodbye. It is a letter meant to be held to the chest, meant to be read over and over again in the lonely years to come. When the letters are finished, they are folded carefully, with slow, reverent hands. They are tucked into envelopes, sealing away a small piece of a living soul, to be sent back across the water to the world of the living. The days leading up to the departure are filled with a strange, dreamlike calm. The frantic energy of preparation has passed, leaving only a quiet waiting. The sailors walk the decks with a slow, measured grace. They mend their clothes, stitching a loose button or darning a sock, finding peace in the small, necessary tasks of daily life. They clean their boots. They polish the brass fittings until they shine like captured pieces of the sun. There is a profound dignity in these small acts, a way of maintaining order and humanity in the face of an overwhelming, chaotic universe. Sometimes, a sailor will reach into his tunic and touch the 1,000-stitch belt wrapped warmly around his waist. He can almost feel the presence of the women who sewed it. He can almost hear the soft murmur of their voices, whispering prayers into the cotton. It grounds him. It reminds him that he is tethered to something beautiful, something enduring, far beyond the gray horizon. And then, the quietest hour arrives. The darkness just before the dawn, when the mist rolls thick and heavy over the surface of the water, blurring the line between the ocean and the sky. There are no brass bands playing on the shore. There are no cheering crowds waving flags, no parades of triumphant farewell. The departure is as silent as a falling leaf. Deep within the ships, the massive engines begin to turn. A low, throbbing heartbeat shakes the floorboards, waking the iron giants from their slumber. The anchor chains are pulled upward, link by heavy link, groaning softly in the damp air as they emerge from the sea. Slowly, with a solemn, inevitable grace, the great gray shapes begin to move. They glide through the mist like phantoms, their bows parting the dark water with a gentle, continuous whisper. The water folds back against the hulls, leaving a trail of white foam that glows faintly in the pre-dawn light. On the decks, the men stand in perfect silence. They line the rails, shoulder to shoulder, their faces turned back toward the land. The mountains are just a suggestion of deeper darkness against the night sky. As the ships pick up speed, slipping out of the sheltered waters and into the vast, open embrace of the sea, the shoreline begins to fade. The familiar shapes of the islands dissolve into the mist, slipping away like a memory fading into the edges of sleep. They watch until there is nothing left to see but the rolling gray waves and the unending sky. They watch until the home they know is only a feeling carried in the chest. They turn their faces to the wind, breathing in the cold air of the open ocean. The ships sail onward, a long, quiet line of steel and human hearts, moving deeper into the shadows of the morning. They carry with them the folded letters, the red-stitched belts, the memories of autumn leaves and paper screens. They sail not with the fiery zeal of a rising sun, but with the quiet, tragic resolve of men walking into the dusk, bound together by the gentle currents of duty, of brotherhood, and of a love that transcends the approaching storm. The sea opens wide before them, vast, indifferent, and endlessly deep, whispering its ancient, soothing psalm against the iron walls that hold their fragile, beautiful lives. The ocean at night does not care for the complex plans of men, it only listens to the slow, steady heartbeat of steel slipping through its dark waters. High above the rolling waves, the bridge of the warship is a sanctuary of shadows and hushed voices. The only illumination comes from the soft, red glow of the binnacle, casting long, gentle shadows against the bulkheads and painting the tired faces of the crew in warm, muted tones. It is a quiet place, wrapped in the endless, rhythmic hum of the ship's great engines far below. Out here, on the edge of the world, the sea stretches into infinity, a vast canvas of ink beneath a canopy of cold and different stars. A heavy canvas bag has just been brought up from the radio room, passing through quiet corridors and up narrow steel ladders. Inside it lies the grand design. A master strategy, born from the minds of admirals sitting in distant, well-lit rooms thousands of miles away. It is a plan of sweeping arrows, of elaborate decoys, of perfect timing, and of impossible sacrifices. On paper, it is a masterpiece of martial geometry. But here, in the damp, salt-kissed air of the night watch, the plan feels less like a triumph of strategy and more like a tremendously heavy stone placed gently into the hands of exhausted men. The chief navigator stands over his wooden plotting table. He is a quiet man, with silver slowly threading through his dark hair, and eyes that hold the gentle patience of someone who has spent a lifetime measuring the stars. He unrolls the thick, stiff paper of the nautical chart, smoothing the curled edges with the flat of his palms. The paper makes a soft, scraping sound against the wood. He picks up his brass dividers, the metal cool and familiar against his fingertips. He does not look at the grand sweeping arrows. He looks at the narrow straits, the hidden shoals, the vast, unforgiving expanses of water they must cross unseen. He places the sharp point of the divider on the map, measuring the distance. He moves it carefully, walking the brass legs across the paper. The math tells a story the admiral's speeches do not. It tells a story of a fleet stretched to its breaking point. Of fuel tanks that are running low, holding only the thick, unrefined oil that burns with a dark, heavy smoke. It tells a story of timing so fragile, so delicate, that a single change in the wind, a single unseen storm, could cause the entire grand design to unravel like a pulled thread. He rubs his tired eyes, feeling the ache of sleepless nights settling deep behind his brow. For a moment, his mind drifts away from the chart. He thinks of his days as a young student, sitting in a quiet classroom with the afternoon sun warming the wooden floorboards, learning the absolute, comforting certainty of geometry. He finds a strange, quiet solace in the math. Even now, facing a path that seems to lead only into deeper darkness, the math remains true. The stars will rise where they are supposed to rise. The currents will pull exactly as the moon dictates. He breathes in the smell of the chart paper and the faint scent of brass polish, holding onto the steady, unchanging laws of navigation to calm the quiet fluttering of his heart. Outside, on the open platforms exposed to the rushing wind, the lookouts stand their watch. The wind is cold, carrying the invisible mist of the ocean, leaving a fine layer of salt on their eyelashes and the rough wool of their coats. They lean against the heavy iron mounts of their binoculars, peering out into the pitch-black void. To stare into the darkness for hours is a trick on the mind. The blackness begins to swirl and shift. Every shadow of a wave looks like the hull of a submarine. Every faint reflection of starlight on the water looks like the wake of a torpedo. It takes a profound, quiet strength to stand in the dark and wait for the unseen. A young lookout, his hands numb inside his woolen gloves, reaches up to wipe the heavy glass lenses of his binoculars with a piece of soft flannel. He moves with slow, deliberate care. It is a ritual, a small, grounding motion that keeps his mind from wandering into fear. Beside him, an older sailor steps out from the shadow of the superstructure. He does not say a word. He simply reaches out and presses a small, metal thermos into the young man's hands. The young lookout unscrews the cup. The sweet, roasted aroma of warm barley tea rises into the cold air. He takes a slow sip, feeling the warmth travel down his throat, spreading a gentle, comforting heat through his chest. He hands the thermos back, offering a small, silent nod of gratitude. In the dark, words are unnecessary. The shared warmth of the tea, the simple, quiet presence of another human being standing shoulder to shoulder in the cold, these are the things that hold the night together. It is an unspoken promise. I am here, you are here, and we will watch the dark together. Down below, deep within the labyrinth of steel corridors, the men who have just finished their shift try to find a few hours of rest. They lie in their narrow canvas hammocks, swaying gently with the slow, rocking motion of the ship. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool and sleeping men. A young mechanic lies awake, staring at the dimly lit ceiling just inches above his face. He traces the lines of a riveted seam with his eyes. He feels the thrumming vibration of the ship in his spine. He knows about the plan, the whispers that have traveled through the mess halls and the engine rooms. They call it the decisive battle. But he does not feel like a warrior in a grand epic. He just feels tired. He thinks of the small, delicate origami crane tucked inside the breast pocket of his uniform. It was folded by his little sister, the paper now softened and worn at the edges from how many times he has touched it. He slides his hand over his chest, feeling the small, flat shape of the paper crane through the fabric. He closes his eyes and pictures her sitting at the low wooden table in their living room, her small hands carefully creasing the colored paper, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. He holds onto that image. He holds onto the feeling of her small arms wrapping around his waist before he left for the train station. It is a quiet, profound anchor. He does not want to fight a grand battle. He just wants to see the paper crane sit on the windowsill of his home once more. Lulled by the steady, heartbeat rhythm of the engines and the slow sway of the ocean, he finally drifts into a fragile sleep. Back on the bridge, the night wears on. The officers speak in low, hushed tones, adjusting the speed, correcting the course by a fraction of a degree. They are men asked to do the impossible, guided by a plan that requires perfection in an imperfect world. Yet, there is no panic in their voices. There is only the quiet, heavy resolve of duty. It is a resilience not born of fanaticism, but of a deeply human acceptance. They have been given a task, and they will perform it, not for the grand arrows on the admiral's map, but for the men sleeping below decks, and for the men standing out in the cold wind. They navigate by the stars, those ancient, distant lights that have guided sailors across these waters for thousands of years. The stars do not judge the plans of empires. They simply shine, offering their pale, gentle light to anyone who looks up. The chief navigator steps out onto the open wing of the bridge. He tilts his head back, letting the cool wind wash over his face. He finds the familiar constellations, tracing their shapes in the sky. He feels a strange sense of peace wash over him. The grand plan, the immense burden of the coming days, seems to dissolve into the vastness of the night sky. He is just a man on a ship, surrounded by water and light. He takes a deep, slow breath of the salt air. As the first, faint suggestion of gray begins to soften the eastern horizon, the fleet sails on. They move in perfect, silent unison, a procession of steel slipping quietly through the dawn. The great plan has been handed down, the course has been set, and there is nothing left to do but follow the path laid out before them. They hold on to their rituals, their memories, and their quiet kindnesses, carrying these small, bright lanterns of humanity into the fading dark, listening to the gentle whisper of the water parting before them, embracing the day that is slowly breaking over the edge of the world. The wind off the island carries a fragrance so sweet and heavy, it feels like a memory you are afraid to lose. Here, in the sheltered waters of the Brunei anchorage, the world is painted in colors so vivid they almost ache to look at. The morning mist still clings to the dense, emerald canopy of the jungle, a soft, white veil resting over the shoulders of ancient trees. The water is a mirror of polished jade, perfectly still, perfectly calm, reflecting the vibrant life of the shoreline. It is a place that breathes. You can feel the slow, rhythmic inhalation of the earth, the damp, rich humidity of the soil, and the warm, golden light of the tropical sun breaking through the leaves. Anchored in this quiet paradise, the great gray warships look like intruders from another world. They are mountains of cold iron and riveted steel, vast and silent, casting long, dark shadows over the green water. Yet, This morning, the harshness of the metal is softened by the embrace of the island. The warm breeze drifts down from the hills, slipping past the massive gun turrets and sweeping through the narrow, open corridors of the decks. It brings with it a gift. The delicate, unmistakable scent of wild orchid blossoms. It is a scent that speaks of life, of hidden gardens, of rain falling on soft earth. For the thousands of men living within the hollow steel bellies of these ships, this fragrance is a sudden, breathtaking grace. They step out from the dim, artificial light of their compartments and walk to the open railings, closing their eyes as the warm air washes over them. They lean against the lifelines, their hands resting on the cool cables, and simply breathe. They do not speak. There is a profound, shared silence that has settled over the entire fleet. It is not the tense, heavy silence of fear, but the deep, melancholic stillness of a long goodbye. They know why they are here. They know the impossible weight of the journey that lies just beyond the horizon. The letters have been written, the maps have been drawn. The quiet resignation has already taken root in their hearts. And so, they look at the shoreline not as conquerors, but as men taking one last, lingering look at the world of the living. A young gunner stands near the bow, his hands gently holding a small, vibrant green leaf that drifted onto the deck during the night. He turns it over in his fingers, tracing the delicate, intricate veins that run through it. It is so fragile, so perfectly crafted by the quiet patience of nature. He thinks of the small garden behind his family's home, of the way the moss grew soft and thick over the stepping stones. He remembers the smell of the pine trees in the late summer, and the gentle sound of his mother's broom sweeping the wooden porch. Carefully, reverently, he opens a small, worn notebook he keeps in his breast pocket. He places the green leaf flat against the yellowed paper, closing the book and pressing it against his chest. It is a tiny piece of the earth, a fragment of life, that he will carry with him into the vast, blue emptiness of the ocean. It is a quiet promise to remember what it feels like to be alive, even when the world around him turns to steel and fire. All along the decks, similar quiet moments unfold. Older sailors, men whose faces are lined with years of salt wind and sun, share a final cup of tea poured from a dented tin kettle. The tea is warm and bitter, but they drink it slowly, savoring the heat against their palms. They look at the jungle, at the birds darting like flashes of jewels through the canopy, and they commit the colors to memory. They are taking a photograph with their hearts, locking away the emerald greens, the deep browns of the soil, and the brilliant, blinding white of the clouds. They know that where they are going, there will be no forests. There will be no soil to walk upon, no flowers to bloom in the spring. There will only be the endless, shifting desert of the sea, indifferent and profound. This vibrant shoreline is the last threshold. It is the boundary between the warmth of the human world and the cold, unyielding reality of their duty. Deep within the ships, the quiet morning is gently broken by the low, rumbling vibration of the great engines waking from their sleep. It is a sound felt more than heard, a slow, rhythmic throbbing that travels up through the decks and into the soles of their boots. The giant turbines begin to turn, spinning the massive brass propellers far below the surface of the water. There are no sharp commands shouted across the water. The orders are passed quietly, with simple nods and hushed voices. On the bow, the heavy capstans begin to turn. The massive anchor chains, thick as a man's torso, rise from the jade-colored water, bringing with them the smell of the deep mud. The water falls from the heavy iron links like rain, a soft, pattering sound against the hull. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the immense shapes of the fleet begin to move. They turn with a slow, agonizing grace, their long, gray prows aligning toward the open channel. The water churns softly at their sterns, leaving a trail of white foam that quickly dissolves back into the green glass of the sea. The sailors do not leave the railings. It is an unspoken rule among them, you do not go below deck while the land is still in sight. You stay, and you bear witness to the fating of the world. They stand shoulder to shoulder, thousands of men, wrapped in a blanket of collective memory and quiet sorrow. As the ships gather speed, the warm breeze off the island begins to shift. It is slowly replaced by the steady, drawing wind of the open ocean. The scent of the orchid blossoms begins to thin, blending with the sharp, clean bite of sea salt and the heavy, metallic odor of burning fuel oil. The sailors close their eyes, trying to hold onto that sweet, humid fragrance for just a moment longer, breathing in the last breath of the jungle before it is lost forever. The fleet glides out of the anchorage, a long, mournful procession of iron ghosts moving toward the horizon. The vibrant green of the hills begins to soften, turning to a hazy, muted blue as the distance grows. The individual trees blur into a solid mass, and the jagged peaks of the island flatten against the sky. Two friends, standing near the aft rail, watch the land retreat. One of them reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, crumpled pack of cigarettes. He offers one to his companion in silence. They light them, cupping their hands against the growing sea breeze, the small orange embers glowing warmly in the morning light. They exhale, watching the gray smoke drift away over the wake of the ship, mingling with the vast, open sky. They do not speak of the battle to come. They do not speak of the impossible odds or the desperate gamble they are a part of. They simply stand close together, finding comfort in the solid presence of a friend, feeling the warmth of another living soul in a world that is quickly stripping everything else away. The ocean opens wide before them, a vast, unbroken expanse of deep, rolling blue. The gentle lapping of the water against the hull grows louder, a rhythmic, soothing lullaby that has carried sailors to their rest for countless generations. The land is nothing more than a faint smudge on the edge of the world now, a whisper of a memory fading into the mist. They turn their faces forward, toward the open sea. The sun climbs higher, casting its bright, impartial light over the fleet. They are moving into the deep water now, leaving the colors, the warmth, and the sweet scent of the orchids behind. They carry only themselves, their quiet resilience, and the fragile, beautiful memories tucked carefully inside their hearts, sailing peacefully, silently, into the endless twilight of the sea. There is a heaviness to the ocean at midnight, a thick, velvet silence that presses against the hull and whispers of things unseen. Here, in the narrow, deep waters of the Palawan Passage, the world has shrunk down to a claustrophobic corridor of darkness. The vibrant green islands of the morning are gone, swallowed by a night so absolute it feels as though the stars themselves have closed their eyes. The ocean is no longer a shimmering mirror of jade and blue. It is a vast, ink-black canyon, deep and cold, hiding secrets beneath its slow, rolling surface. The great fleet moves through this shadowed trench in a staggered, cautious line. They do not sail in straight paths. They weave and turn in a slow, rhythmic dance, zigzagging through the water in a desperate attempt to become unpredictable. But in the dark, every movement feels heavy. Every turn of the rudder feels like a loud footstep in an empty, echoing room. The water here is alive with a strange, ghostly light. As the heavy steel bows cut through the sea, they disturb millions of tiny, glowing organisms. The wake of the ships becomes a trailing ribbon of pale, ethereal green fire. It is a beautiful, mesmerizing sight, a river of starlight floating on the black waves. But to the men standing on the decks, that beautiful light is a source of quiet dread. It is a glowing arrow, pointing directly to their position, illuminating their path for any eyes that might be watching from the depths below. On the open wings of the bridge, the night watch stands frozen in place. The air is stifling, thick with tropical humidity that settles over the skin like a warm, damp woolen blanket. The sailors grip the heavy iron railings, leaning forward, peering into the endless black. Their eyes ache. When you stare into the dark for too long, the mind begins to paint its own pictures. A patch of foam becomes the periscope of a hunter. The shadow of a low-hanging cloud transforms into the silhouette of an enemy vessel. They blink away the salt and sweat, trying to hold onto reality. A young lookout, barely old enough to shave, presses his face against the rubber eye cups of his heavy binoculars. His hands are numb from gripping the metal so tightly. He tries to slow his breathing, matching the rhythm of his lungs to the slow, steady rise and fall of the ship. He thinks of a cool, clear stream that runs behind his family's home, where the water ripples gently over smooth, white stones. He imagines dipping his hands into that freezing, sweet water, washing away the oppressive heat of this tropical night. Beside him, an older petty officer notices the slight tremble in the young man's shoulders. The older man does not speak. He simply reaches into his deep coat pocket and withdraws a small, hard piece of crystallized sugar, wrapped in a square of thin wax paper. He unwraps it with slow, deliberate care. The tiny crinkle of the paper sounds impossibly loud in the hushed quiet of the bridge. He taps the young lookout on the arm and offers the candy. The boy takes it, bowing his head in a silent gesture of profound thanks. As the sweet, simple taste of sugar melts on his tongue, the trembling stops. In this vast, terrifying expanse of dark water, that small, shared piece of candy is a tether. It is a reminder that he is not alone in the void. He is surrounded by brothers, bound together by quiet acts of grace. Deep below the waterline, hidden away in a tiny, dimly lit compartment, another kind of watch is being kept. The air here smells of warm copper wire, ozone, and the stale sweat of anxious men. This is the listening room. A sailor sits hunched over an intricate console of dials and glowing amber lights, a pair of heavy, bakelite headphones clamped tightly over his ears. He is the ship's ears, tasked with reaching out into the invisible abyss. He closes his eyes, blocking out the dim glow of the room, and lets his mind drift down into the water. The ocean is never truly silent. Through the sensitive hydrophones, he hears a strange, haunting symphony. He hears the distant, mournful clicking of shrimp. He hears the low, groaning songs of great whales communicating across hundreds of miles. And he hears the deep, rhythmic thrumming of his own fleet's propellers, churning the water like a collective, mechanical heartbeat. He listens past all of that. He strains to hear the one sound that haunts his quietest hours, the high, metallic whine of a submerged enemy. The pressure in the small room is immense. Thousands of men are sleeping in their hammocks just a few bulkheads away, completely vulnerable, trusting their lives to the sharpness of his hearing. To calm his racing heart, he imagines he is sitting in the center of a bamboo forest in the late autumn, listening to the wind hollow out the long green stalks. He breathes in slowly. He listens to the deep. In the berthing compartments, the off-duty sailors sway gently in their canvas hammocks. The heat below decks is heavy, wrapping around them in the dark. Some toss and turn, trapped in the restless half-sleep of anticipation. Others sleep deeply, their faces softened by dreams of distant homes. Tucked beneath their pillows are the letters they wrote the night before. Folded inside their tunics are the thousand-stitch belts, carrying the whispered prayers of their mothers. They are suspended between the sky and the crushing deep, resting inside a fragile eggshell of steel. And then, the velvet silence is broken. It does not begin with a roar. It begins with a sudden, sharp whisper in the headphones of the listener below. A high-pitched, mechanical hum that cuts through the organic sounds of the sea. His eyes snap open. His hand flies to the dial, tuning the frequency, his breath catching in his throat. It is the sound of pure geometry closing in. The sound of a torpedo, running fast and shallow beneath the black waves. Topside, the young lookout with the taste of sugar still on his lips sees it. Out in the dark, cutting through the glowing green bioluminescence, a pale, white streak of phosphorus appears. It looks like a shooting star that has fallen from the heavens and is racing just beneath the surface of the water. It is moving with a terrifying, purposeful grace, drawing a straight, glowing line directly toward the heart of the fleet. There is no time to turn the massive, heavy ships. They are too slow, too deeply entrenched in their forward momentum. There is only a held breath. A collective, silent bracing across the decks. The men watch the glowing streak approach, a beautiful, deadly light in the absolute dark. The impact is a deep, foundational shudder. It feels as though the entire ocean has suddenly pushed against the hull with the palm of a giant hand. A towering geyser of water erupts alongside the ship, blooming upward like a slow-motion flower of white lace and shattered glass, illuminated for a fraction of a second by a pale, internal flash. The sound is not a sharp crack, but a profound, sorrowful groaning of steel being pushed beyond its limits. The great ship trembles violently, a vibration that travels through the soles of the sailors' boots and rattles their very teeth. Instantly, the power fails. The soft red lights of the bridge blink out. The dim bulbs in the sleeping quarters fade into absolute, suffocating darkness. The calm of the night watch shatters, replaced by a surreal, dreamlike urgency. Below decks, the sleeping men are thrown from their hammocks by the force of the tremor. They wake in complete blackness, the air suddenly thick with the sharp, choking smell of fuel oil and cordite. But there is no screaming. There is only the desperate, whispered calling of names in the dark. Kenji? Are you there? Take my hand. I have the ladder. Men stumble blindly through tilted corridors, reaching out to find the shoulders of their friends. They move purely on memory, navigating the labyrinth of steel that has suddenly become a trap. The ocean is rushing in. It does not sound angry. It sounds inevitable, a heavy, rushing river flooding into the spaces where men just moments ago were dreaming of home. Topside, the deck begins to list. It slopes gently at first, a subtle shift in gravity, and then with a terrifying, unstoppable momentum. The men who were standing watch now cling to the railings, their boots slipping on the wet steel. They look down at the black water, suddenly feeling very small, very fragile. The petty officer grips the shoulder of the young lookout. He does not issue an order. He simply looks at the boy, his eyes reflecting the pale light of the stars that are finally beginning to peek through the clouds. He gives a slow, reassuring nod. A silent promise that whatever comes next, they will face it together. The great, proud vessel, a marvel of engineering and human will, is losing its fight with the sea. The iron is returning to the deep. The sailors begin to loosen their boots. They untie the heavy coats that will pull them down. They stand on the sloping deck, feeling the cool wind on their faces one last time before they step off the edge of their floating world. The dark waters of the Palawan Passage reach up to embrace them, pulling them away from the shattered steel, pulling them down into a cold, quiet night where all the grand plans of empires dissolve into the ancient, uncaring currents of the sea. When the great ship finally slips beneath the waves, the ocean does not roar, it simply sighs, closing over the steel as if it were never there at all. In the sudden, profound silence that follows, the world is reduced to the slow, rhythmic sound of breathing and the gentle lapping of water against floating wood. The mighty flagship, a sprawling iron fortress that had been a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of an empire's pride, is gone. In its place is only the vast, breathing expanse of the dark sea. For the men who have just stepped off the vanishing decks, the transition is a quiet shock. They plunge into a cold that steals the breath from their lungs, a deep, pervasive chill that reaches instantly for their bones. But as they break the surface, gasping for the damp night air, they find that the ocean has changed. A thick, heavy blanket of black fuel oil has bled from the dying ship, spreading far and wide across the surface of the water. It coats their skin, their hair, and their clothes in a viscous, clinging layer. It burns their eyes with a dull, persistent sting and fills their mouths with the sharp, bitter taste of ancient earth and carbon. Yet, this same dark oil performs a strange, melancholy magic on the sea. It suppresses the whitecaps and smooths the broken waves, turning the turbulent ocean into a landscape of slow, rolling, glassy hills. It is as if the sea itself has been wrapped in heavy velvet, silencing the splashing and softening the movements of the men who now drift upon it. They tread water in the dark, hundreds of solitary souls suspended between the crushing depths below and the infinite sky above. When they tilt their heads back to clear the oil from their eyes, they are met with a sight of overwhelming, breathtaking beauty. The storm clouds have parted, revealing a vast canopy of stars. Without the soft, red glow of the ship's instruments to dilute the night, the heavens are ablaze with diamond dust. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of pale, shimmering mist. These are the same stars that hang over the quiet, snow-capped mountains of their home islands. They are the same stars that reflect in the flooded rice paddies of their villages. The stars are beautiful, cold, and entirely indifferent to the struggles of empires. They do not care for maps, or grand strategies, or the names of sunken ships. To the men shivering in the water, this indifference is not cruel, it is deeply, profoundly soothing. The universe is vast and unchanging, and their immediate terror begins to dissolve into the quiet, eternal stillness of the night. In this dark, oily expanse, a new kind of world forms, a fragile, floating brotherhood born of absolute necessity and quiet grace. The rigid lines of rank and duty have dissolved in the salt water. There are no admirals or cooks, no officers or enlisted boys. There are only men. Fragile, shivering human beings, bound together by the simple, beautiful desire to see the morning sun. A young sailor, his limbs growing heavy and numb, feels himself beginning to slip beneath the heavy, oil-slicked surface. He has kicked off his boots, but his sodden cotton uniform feels like it is made of lead. His movements are slowing, giving way to a seductive, sleepy surrender. He closes his eyes, ready to let the gentle currents pull him down into the quiet dark. Suddenly, a hand reaches through the black water and grips his shoulder. It is a firm, calloused hand, slick with oil but holding on with an iron strength. An older petty officer, a man who has spent his life listening to the hum of the ship's boilers, pulls the boy upward. He does not shout. He does not issue an order. He simply glides a shattered piece of wooden decking toward the young man. "Rest your arms here," the older man whispers, his voice a soft, raspy comfort in the dark. "Do not kick so hard. Just float. I am right here beside you." The boy clings to the rough, splintered wood, burying his face against his arms. He feels the warmth of the older man's presence hovering just a few feet away. They do not speak again. They simply share the piece of wreckage, two shadows bobbing gently on the rolling glass of the sea, anchored to the world by a quiet, unspoken promise of mutual survival. All around them, similar unseen acts of everyday heroism are unfolding in the dark. Men call out to one another, their voices barely more than whispers carrying over the calm water. "Yamamoto, are you there?" "I am here, my friend. I am still here." It is a roll call of the living, a gentle murmuring that weaves a web of comfort across the scattered wreckage. Just hearing a familiar voice, just knowing that another heart is beating nearby in the darkness, is enough to keep the cold from claiming their spirits. They form small clusters, clinging to cork life rings, overturned rafts, or simply holding onto each other's belts, creating tiny, floating islands of humanity in the void. Underneath his soaked and heavy tunic, a young navigator feels the 1,000-stitch belt wrapped tightly around his waist. The cotton is saturated with cold seawater, yet, in his mind, it radiates a fierce, protective heat. He closes his eyes and pictures his young wife sitting on the tatami mat of their small home. He remembers the way the afternoon light caught the fine, dark hairs on the back of her neck as she leaned over her sewing. He remembers the soft, rhythmic sound of the needle piercing the cloth. He imagines that every stitch is a tiny heartbeat, a pulse of love that has traveled across thousands of miles of ocean to wrap around him now. He presses his oil-stained hand against his stomach, holding the wet fabric. He focuses entirely on the memory of her warm, gentle smile. It becomes a lantern in his mind, a bright, steady glow that pushes back the creeping, freezing dark. He breathes in slowly. He breathes out. He tells himself that he must return to her, that he cannot leave her waiting by the paper screen. As the hours stretch into an eternity, the cold begins to work its way deeper. The shivering becomes uncontrollable, a violent shaking that drains the last reserves of their strength. The temptation to fall asleep is a heavy, sweet weight pressing against their eyelids. To fight the silence, someone begins to hum. It starts low and fragile, a wavering sound from a sailor clinging to a canvas bag. It is a traditional folk song from the northern provinces, a simple, rhythmic melody about fishermen returning home at dusk. The tune is melancholic but deeply comforting, filled with the imagery of warm hearths and the smell of roasting fish. Slowly, another voice joins in, picking up the harmony. Then another. And another. Soon, a soft, ghostly chorus drifts across the oily black water. It is not a song of defiance or martial pride. It is a lullaby. It is the sound of men wrapping a blanket of shared memory around their shivering shoulders. The melody rises and falls with the gentle swells of the ocean, a beautiful, heartbreaking testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They sing to keep each other awake. They sing to remind the dark sea that they are still alive. The stars slowly begin their quiet retreat, sliding down toward the western horizon. The turning of the earth brings the first, subtle promise of dawn. The absolute blackness of the sky bruises into a deep, velvety indigo, then softens into a pale, bruised purple. The morning light creeps over the water, gentle and hesitant. It reveals a surreal, painted landscape. The ocean is perfectly flat, heavily glazed with the dark oil. Floating upon it are hundreds of men, their faces masked completely in black, their hair slicked flat against their heads. They look like statues carved from obsidian, bobbing silently in the dawn. Only the whites of their eyes and the pale pink of their lips reveal the life still flickering inside them. They blink against the growing light, turning their heads slowly. And there, emerging from the morning mist like quiet, gray ghosts, are the silhouettes of the rescue destroyers. The ships move with agonizing slowness, afraid to turn their propellers too fast among the floating men. Ropes are lowered. Cargo nets are draped over the steel sides, dipping into the oily water. There is no cheering. There is no triumphant shouting. The rescue is as quiet and solemn as the night that preceded it. Men with strong, dry hands reach down into the water, grasping the wrists of their brothers, pulling them up from the heavy, clinging sea. When the young boy who had nearly given up is finally hauled onto the solid steel deck, his legs give out beneath him. He collapses onto the cold, hard metal, but it feels like the softest bed he has ever known. Someone wraps a thick, dry woolen blanket around his trembling shoulders. Someone else hands him a tin cup of hot, sweet tea. He looks up and sees the older petty officer standing a few feet away, leaning against the bulkhead, his face completely black with oil, a steaming cup in his own hands. The older man catches the boy's eye. He does not smile, for he is too exhausted, but his eyes crinkle at the corners in a quiet, profound acknowledgement. They have lost their mighty ship. They have left the beautiful, intricate plans of their empire at the bottom of the trench. But as they sit shivering on the deck, feeling the morning sun finally begin to warm their faces, they know they have salvaged something far more precious. They have carried each other through the infinite dark. They have held onto the fragile, luminous thread of their humanity, keeping it safe and glowing brightly, long after the last iron giant slipped silently beneath the sea. The morning sky over the Shibuyan Sea is a masterpiece of painted light, so painfully beautiful it almost makes you forget you are at war. After the terrifying, suffocating darkness of the night before, the dawn arrives like a gentle exhale, wrapping the weary fleet in a soft, golden embrace. The water here is not the deep, frightening black of the Palawan Passage. It is a brilliant, welcoming lapis lazuli, so clear and calm it perfectly mirrors the vast dome of the heavens. As the sun climbs just above the horizon, its rays catch the high, wispy cirrus clouds drifting lazily across the blue. They are painted in delicate shades of peach, lavender, and pale gold. They look like long ribbons of torn silk, scattered across a quiet room by a passing breeze. For a brief, fragile moment, there is peace. The great gray ships glide smoothly over the glassy water, their bows pushing aside gentle, white-laced folds of sea. On the decks, Men who survived the oil and the freezing dark of the night stand with their faces turned upward, eyes closed, simply letting the warmth of the sun soak into their shivering bones. They hang their damp, heavy coats over the railings, hoping the tropical air will dry the salt from the wool. They breathe in deeply, grateful to smell the clean, sweet scent of the open ocean instead of the sharp, metallic odor of fear. High above the main decks, perched on the towering pagodas and superstructures of the ships, are the anti-aircraft stations. They are small, circular steel tubs, suspended between the ocean and the sky. To sit inside one is to feel completely exposed, like a bird resting in a high nest, with nothing but the wind and the horizon in every direction. Here, the young gunners wait. They are, almost entirely, just boys. Their uniforms hang loosely on their slender frames, and beneath their heavy steel helmets, their faces still hold the soft, unlined grace of youth. They sit on their small metal seats behind the twin barrels of the guns, their legs dangling, looking out at the beautiful, torn silk clouds. In one of these tubs, a 19-year-old gunner leans his head against the cold iron of the gun shield. His eyes are heavy with a profound, aching exhaustion. He has not slept in 2 days. To keep himself awake, he reaches a grease-stained hand into the pocket of his tunic and touches a small, smooth object. It is a wooden amulet, carved into the shape of a resting sparrow, given to him by his grandfather. His thumb traces the familiar grooves of the wood, polished to a soft shine by months of anxious touching. He remembers the quiet, dusty sunlight of his grandfather's workshop. He remembers the smell of cedar shavings and hot tea. He closes his eyes and imagines he is sitting on the wooden porch of that home, listening to the cicadas sing in the late summer heat. The memory is an anchor, a quiet, soothing weight that keeps his mind from floating away into the vast, terrifying blue above him. Beside him, standing on the grated metal floor, is his loader. He is a farm boy from the northern provinces, broad-shouldered and quiet. He holds a heavy clip of brass ammunition across his chest, resting his chin lightly on the cool metal of the shells. Seeing the young gunner nodding off, the loader reaches out and gently taps the boy's helmet. He offers a canteen of water, unscrewing the cap with a soft clinking sound. The gunner takes it with a tired smile, drinking the lukewarm water slowly. It tastes faintly of tin and old tea, but in the heat of the morning, it is a perfect blessing. They share the water in silence, 2 young men tethered to the same piece of iron, finding comfort in the simple, steady presence of one another. They do not talk about the grand plans of the admirals. They do not talk about the ships that were lost in the dark. They just watch the clouds. But the Sibuyan Sea is a place of beautiful illusions. The calm sky is a vast, open door, and soon, the threshold is crossed. It begins not with a shout, but with a sound so low it is felt in the chest before it is heard by the ears. It is a vibration in the air, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that seems to bleed out from the torn silk clouds themselves. It sounds like a sudden shift in the wind, or 1,000 distant bees waking in a hollow tree. The young gunner opens his eyes. The wooden sparrow slips back into his pocket. He sits up straight, his hands instinctively reaching for the heavy brass wheels that control the movement of the gun. Beside him, the loader tenses, his grip tightening on the ammunition clip. All across the fleet, faces turn skyward. The beautiful, painted morning begins to shift. From out of the sun's glare, tiny silver specks appear. At first, they are so small they look like dust motes caught in a beam of light, glittering beautifully against the blue canvas. But the specks grow. They multiply. Dozens turn into scores, pouring out from behind the wispy clouds like a sudden, silver rainstorm gathering on the horizon. They are the American aircraft, wave upon wave of them, filling the sky with a terrible, magnificent geometry. The quiet peace of the morning dissolves, replaced by a surreal, dreamlike slow motion. The order to open fire is given, passing from ship to ship like a ripple across a pond, but to the young men in the gun tubs, the world has already shrunk down to the space between their hands and the sky. The gunner grips the targeting handles. His knuckles turn stark white, the blood draining from his fingers as he holds on with a desperate, terrified strength. He presses his eyes to the sights. His heart is beating a frantic, fluttering rhythm against his ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. Yet, his breathing slows. He enters a strange, silent trance, focusing entirely on the tiny crosshairs, trying to weave a curtain of steel between his ship and the falling sky. When the guns finally speak, it is not an explosive roar, but a rhythmic, deafening drumming. The sky tears open. The pure, lapis lazuli blue is suddenly marred by hundreds of blooming black clouds, dark ink spilling across the delicate silk. The air fills with the screaming of engines and the rushing wind of diving planes. It is a cacophony so immense, so overwhelming, that it wraps around the mind like a heavy blanket, muffling the senses. The gunner does not hear the individual explosions. He only feels the relentless, shaking recoil of his own weapon, pounding into his shoulders, vibrating through his teeth. His world becomes a cycle of pure, exhausting repetition. Track the silver shape. Press the pedal. Feel the shudder. Watch the loader slam the next heavy brass clip into the breech. Track again. The brass casings begin to fall to the grated floor around their feet, hundreds of them, piling up in a glittering, chaotic mound. They chime against the steel like a strange, chaotic wind chime ringing in a hurricane. The smell of sulfur and burnt cordite completely erases the sweet scent of the ocean, filling their lungs with a hot, bitter smoke. Through the lens of the sights, the gunner watches the silver planes dive, their wings flashing in the sunlight. He sees the bombs release, tumbling end over end like dark raindrops falling from the torn clouds. He watches the water around the fleet erupt into towering white geysers, silent and slow-moving from his high perch. It is terrifying, yet strangely beautiful, an intricate, deadly ballet choreographed across the vast stage of the sea. He does not hate the men in the silver planes. He does not even think of them. He only thinks of pushing the sky away. He grips the handles tighter, his hands cramping, his muscles burning with the effort of swinging the heavy barrels. He is terrified, a deep, private fear that pulls in the pit of his stomach, but he does not let go. He holds on because the loader beside him is counting on him. He holds on because the men deep inside the ship, the ones who cannot see the sky, are trusting him to keep the roof from falling in. And then, as quickly as the storm gathered, it breaks. The silver planes bank away, their engines fading into a distant, receding hum, melting back into the horizon. The sky is suddenly, jarringly empty. The silence that follows is thick and heavy, punctuated only by the ringing in their ears and the soft, metallic tinkling of the brass casings settling on the deck. The black puffs of smoke begin to dissipate, stretching out and thinning, blending into the torn silk of the clouds. The young gunner releases his breath in a long, shuddering sigh. He slowly unwraps his fingers from the targeting handles. His hands are locked into claws, stiff and trembling. He looks down at his palms, staring at the deep red creases the metal has left behind. The loader drops to his knees on the brass-covered floor, his chest heaving. He looks up at the gunner, his face streaked with black soot and sweat. He reaches out a trembling hand and rests it gently on the gunner's knee. A silent, profound reassurance. We are still here. The sky has not fallen entirely. The gunner reaches into his pocket. His fingers find the wooden sparrow. He grips it tightly, letting the smooth wood ground him, pulling his spirit back down from the chaotic heavens to the solid reality of the steel deck. They pass the canteen again. The water is warmer now, tasting heavily of the smoke that coats their lips, but they drink it with the reverence of a holy sacrament. They lean back against the iron shield of their nest, their white-knuckled grips finally relaxing into a profound, aching weariness. They look up at the Sibuyan Sea. The sky is still beautiful. The sun still shines with a brilliant, golden indifference. But the illusion is gone. The gentle canopy above them is no longer a source of comfort, it is a vast, open wound, waiting to tear open again. They sit quietly among the brass, resting their tired heads, gathering their quiet resilience, and waiting for the clouds to bring the next rain. When the world turns upside down, and the air grows heavier than the sea, the only light left is the golden rain falling upwards into the clouds. There is a point where exhaustion stops being merely a feeling in the muscles and becomes a place where the mind goes to live. As the sun climbs higher over the Sibuyan Sea, baking the iron decks in a brilliant, uncaring light, the men of the fleet cross into this quiet, shadowed place. The sky above them is no longer an empty canvas of peaceful blue. It has become a revolving door of silver shapes and rushing shadows, bringing wave after wave of the storm. But to the weary eyes watching from the ships, the terrifying spectacle has begun to lose its sharp edges. The world has blurred into a surreal, slow-moving dream. From the gun tubs and the open decks, the sailors fire back. They send thousands of glowing tracer rounds soaring into the sky. In the hazy, shimmering heat of the morning, these lines of light do not look like weapons of war. They look like beautiful, golden raindrops, defying gravity, drifting slowly upward from the surface of the ocean to water the clouds. It is a mesmerizing, hypnotic sight. A garden of fire blooming in reverse. The men watching this upward rain are moving completely on instinct. The conscious mind has retreated, hiding somewhere deep inside to protect itself from the overwhelming roar of the heavens. Their bodies are heavy, weighed down by thick cotton uniforms soaked through with sweat and the fine, oily mist that hangs in the air. Their steel helmets, which felt so reassuring in the dawn, now feel like boulders balanced precariously on their aching necks. Every time the guns fire, the deck shudders. It is a violent, rattling shake, but to the exhausted men, it just feels like the slow, steady heartbeat of a tired giant. In one of the high anti-aircraft nests, a young loader collapses back against the curved steel shield of the tub. His chest heaves with ragged, shallow breaths. His hands, entirely blackened by grease and the scorching heat of the brass casings, hang limply at his sides. The skin on his palms is blistered, rubbed raw by the endless, frantic motion of lifting and pushing the heavy shells. He closes his eyes, letting his head tilt back toward the sky. The noise around him, the screaming engines, the tearing wind, the deep, hollow concussions, muffles into a continuous, droning hum. It sounds like the rush of a distant waterfall. He feels he cannot lift his arms one more time. He feels that if he simply stays here, perfectly still, he might finally fall asleep. Then, a shadow falls across his face, blocking the harsh glare of the sun. He opens his heavy eyelids. Kneeling beside him is an older sailor, a man from the damage control party whose face is lined with a mixture of soot and profound gentleness. The older man does not speak. He knows that words are useless here, easily lost to the wind and the ringing in their ears. Instead, the older man unclips a small, dented aluminum canteen from his belt. He uncorks it with a soft pop. He reaches into his tunic and pulls out a folded, relatively clean square of white cotton, perhaps a handkerchief from home, perhaps a piece of a torn shirt. Slowly, deliberately, he pours a tiny splash of the precious, fresh water onto the cloth. He takes the young loader's scorched, trembling hand in his own. His touch is impossibly light. With slow, careful motions, he begins to wipe away the black grease. He wraps the cool, damp cotton around the boy's blistered palm, tying it off with a gentle knot. The coolness of the water sinking into his burned skin is the most beautiful feeling the young boy has ever known. It is a sharp, brilliant point of grace in a world that has otherwise turned to fire. The boy looks up into the older man's eyes. They share a long, quiet look. The older man gives a single, reassuring nod, his eyes crinkling softly at the edges. He reaches out and rests his heavy, calloused hand firmly on the boy's shoulder. It is just a hand on a shoulder. But in that small, silent gesture, an entire universe of meaning is transferred. It says, "I am here. I see your pain. You are not alone. Just hold on a little longer." The boy takes a deep, shuddering breath. The trembling in his arms slowly subsides. Anchored by the warmth of that hand, he finds a hidden reserve of strength deep within his tired bones. He nods back. He turns to the ammunition box, ready to face the sky once more. Deep below the waterline, far away from the golden rain and the blinding sun, the atmosphere is heavy and stifling. The air conditioning has failed, and the cavernous steel corridors feel like the inside of a sealed oven. The men down here cannot see the silver plains. They cannot see the tracer fire. They only feel the violent pitching of the ship and hear the terrifying, muffled thuds of bombs striking the water outside the hull. In a dim, red-lit compartment near the magazines, a group of sailors sits huddled together on the metal floor grates. The darkness is absolute, save for the single, glowing emergency bulb above the hatch. They are trapped in a claustrophobic box of waiting. The anxiety of the unseen is a heavy weight that presses against their chests, making it difficult to breathe. To break the suffocating silence, a young machinist reaches into his canvas bag. He feels around in the dark until his fingers brush against something round and firm. It is a single, slightly bruised mandarin orange. It had been tucked into his pack days ago, a small luxury saved for a quiet moment. He pulls it out. In the dim red light, the orange skin looks like a tiny, glowing coal. He digs his thumbnail into the top of the fruit. As the peel breaks, a sudden, sharp mist of citrus oil sprays into the hot, stagnant air. The scent is incredibly vivid, piercing through the heavy smells of sweat, hot copper, and fear. It smells of sunlight. It smells of winter mornings at home, sitting around a warm table. The men in the dark compartment collectively inhale. Shoulders drop. The tension in their jaws loosens. The machinist peels the orange slowly, stripping away the bright rind with careful reverence. He pulls the fruit apart, separating the small, crescent-shaped segments. He does not eat them. Instead, he reaches out into the gloom and presses a single slice into the hand of the man sitting next to him. That man takes it, bows his head quietly, and passes a segment to the next. The single orange travels around the circle in the dark. It is a tiny, fragile communion. They eat the sweet, bright fruit in total silence, letting the cool juice soothe their parched throats. For a fleeting moment, they are not sailors trapped inside a steel machine under a burning sea. They are just men, sharing a small piece of the earth, holding onto the simple, beautiful memory of life beyond the bulkheads. As the hours bleed into one another, time completely loses its shape. Morning becomes afternoon without anyone noticing. The attacks come and go like the drawing and exhaling of a great, terrible breath. The exhaustion deepens, settling into the very marrow of their bones. Men fall asleep standing up, leaning against bulkheads or draping themselves over the cold barrels of the guns the moment the sky briefly clears. They dream in fragments. They dream of paper lanterns swaying in a cool evening breeze. They dream of the sound of rain falling on a wooden roof, real rain, soft and gentle, pulling them into a deep, peaceful slumber. When the deep thrumming of the engines or the distant drone of the planes wakes them, they do not jump with a start. They simply open their eyes with a heavy, melancholic acceptance. They rub their faces, leaving dark streaks of soot across their cheeks. They survive not by looking at the vast, terrifying horizon, but by looking at the space immediately around them. They survived by passing a half-empty canteen down a line of desperately thirsty men, each man taking only a tiny sip so that the last man might have a drop. They survived by helping a friend adjust the heavy straps of his life preserver, smoothing the canvas with care. They survived by leaning against one another, physically propping each other up when their legs simply refused to hold their weight. Up on the bridge, the officers stand like statues carved from salt and ash. Their crisp white uniforms are stained gray. Their eyes are sunken, ringed with dark, bruised shadows. They speak to each other in low, hushed tones, preserving every ounce of their energy. When a navigator hands a chart to the captain, their fingers brush, and there is a lingering second of contact, a quiet acknowledgement of the impossible burden they are both carrying. The grand strategies, the intricate maps, the sweeping orders of empires, all of it has melted away in the fierce heat of the Sibuyan Sea. The war has shrunk down to the size of a metal tub, the length of a dark corridor, the space between two outstretched hands. The men do not fight for the flags waving thousands of miles away. They fight for the loader with the blistered hands. They fight for the machinist who shared his orange in the dark. They fight because the man standing next to them is still standing, and to sit down would be to let him bear the weight of the sky alone. As the afternoon wears on, the shadows on the deck begin to lengthen. The sunlight softens, turning the harsh lapis lazuli water into a deeper, cooler shade of blue. The torn silk clouds gather on the horizon, glowing with the rich, bruised colors of twilight. The upward rain of golden tracers slows to a trickle, then finally stops. The men lower their heads. They do not cheer. They do not embrace in triumph. They simply lean against the cooling iron, breathing in the quiet air, listening to the gentle hiss of the water parting at the bow. They close their eyes, wrapped in a blanket of profound, absolute weariness, held together by the quiet, invisible threads of kindness that have tethered them to their humanity, and to each other, through the longest day of their lives. Even the mightiest mountains of iron must eventually return to the quiet embrace of the sea. The storm of silver plains has finally passed, leaving the vast expanse of the Sibuyan Sea wrapped in a heavy, golden silence. The sun is beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long, mournful shadows across the calm water. The ocean has smoothed itself out, the terrifying geysers of white water replaced by gentle, rolling swells that catch the late afternoon light, turning the sea into a vast, shifting mosaic of amber and deep blue. Resting upon this quiet water is the great ship. She is a leviathan, a sprawling fortress of steel that had once seemed to rival the islands themselves in her permanence. But now, she is tired. You can feel it in the very deck beneath your feet. The proud, rhythmic thrumming of her massive engines, a sound that had been the comforting heartbeat of a floating city for so many months, has faded to a weak, struggling pulse. She sits dangerously low in the water. Her massive bow, which used to carve through the waves with such effortless grace, now dips heavily beneath the surface, as if she is bowing her head in profound, incurable exhaustion. The men who walk her slanting decks do not speak above a whisper. They move with a slow, deliberate reverence, the frantic energy of the day's survival giving way to a deep, settling sorrow. They do not look at her as a machine of war, composed of armor plating and heavy barrels. To them, she has been a home. She has been a protector, a gentle giant who sheltered thousands of sons, brothers, and fathers within her vast, hollow walls. She has carried them across thousands of miles of empty ocean, and now, they realize with breaking hearts, she can carry them no further. A young deckhand stands near the massive forward turrets. The angle of the deck is growing steeper, forcing him to lean back just to stand still. He reaches out and rests his bare hand against the painted iron of the gun shield. The metal is still warm from the sun, feeling almost like the skin of a living creature. He slowly runs his palm across the smooth surface. He remembers the day he first walked up her gangway. He was a boy from a small, landlocked farming village, a boy who had never seen anything larger than the local shrine. When he first looked up at her towering pagoda mast, reaching into the clouds like a steel pine tree, he felt a sense of absolute awe and a comforting illusion of invincibility. She was too grand, too magnificent to ever fall. Now, as he feels a deep, internal shudder vibrate through her hull, a single tear cuts a clean line through the dark soot on his cheek. He pats the warm steel gently, twice, the way one might comfort a faithful, dying horse. "You did well," he whispers into the ocean breeze. "You did so well." Deep below, in the cavernous, dimly lit belly of the ship, the sea is slowly claiming the corridors. The water is rising silently, pooling in the lower decks, dark and heavy with spilled oil. There is no panic in these shadows. The men who remain below are moving with a quiet, tragic purpose. A petty officer wades through knee-deep water into the flooded crew quarters. The space is entirely silent except for the gentle, rhythmic sloshing of the water against the bulkheads. He wades toward his locker, the cold water soaking through his trousers. His movements are unhurried. He opens the small metal door and reaches up to the highest shelf, to a small, dry wooden box. Inside is his life. A photograph of his wife, smiling softly beneath a parasol. A small pouch containing a lock of his infant daughter's hair, a child he has never met. He carefully unbuttons the top of his soaked tunic and slides the precious items deep into his breast pocket, holding them tight against his chest. He looks around the dark, flooded room one last time. He sees the canvas hammock swaying slightly just above the waterline, remembering the late nights of quiet laughter, the shared secrets whispered in the dark, the profound brotherhood forged in this tight, steel room. He bows his head to the empty space, a silent gesture of gratitude for the shelter it gave him, and slowly wades back toward the stairs leading to the fading light above. The ship is groaning. It is a haunting, melancholic sound. As her massive weight shifts and the water fills her vast internal spaces, the heavy steel joints and thick armor plates rub against one another. It does not sound like breaking metal. It sounds like the low, mournful song of a great whale, echoing out across the empty ocean. She is singing her own elegy, a deep, resonant vibration that settles into the chests of the men who love her. Up on the highest level of the bridge, the captain stands perfectly still, looking out over the slanting bow. The wind softly ruffles his collar. He has commanded this gentle giant through storms and starlight, knowing every inch of her sprawling decks. The decision he must make is the heaviest burden a sailor can carry, but he knows the time has come. He does not shout the order. He simply turns to his executive officer, his eyes filled with a quiet, bottomless grief, and gives a slow, heavy nod. The word is passed down. It drifts across the decks like a gentle autumn breeze, touching every man. Abandon ship. There is no rush to the railings. There is no shouting or frantic scrambling. What unfolds is a procession of heartbreaking dignity. The men gather on the highest points of the leaning deck. They help the wounded first, supporting their weight, speaking softly to them, wrapping their arms around their shoulders. And then, a spontaneous, deeply human ritual begins. All along the sloping wooden planks, the sailors sit down and begin to unlace their boots. They slip off their heavy leather shoes and place them side by side, perfectly aligned, pointing outward toward the sea. Hundreds of pairs of empty shoes, lined up with meticulous care on the edge of the world. It is the deeply ingrained habit of their homeland, the quiet respect of leaving one's shoes at the entryway before stepping into a home. But here, on the edge of the sinking Leviathan, they are leaving their shoes behind as they step across the final threshold, out of their floating fortress and into the vast, unknown expanse of the ocean. One by one, they slip over the side. They slide down thick hemp ropes, their hands burning slightly from the friction, until they reach the cool, waiting water. The ocean embraces them. It is shockingly cold, but it is calm. They swim outward, putting distance between themselves and the massive iron hull, knowing the terrible pull she will create when she finally slips away. But they do not swim far. They stop, treading water in the deep blue, and they turn back. Thousands of men, bobbing gently in the rolling swells, forming a vast, silent circle around their dying home. The setting sun paints the sky in bruised shades of violet, rose, and dark indigo. The light catches the water streaming off her slanting deck, making it look as though she is weeping glowing, golden tears. The bow slips entirely beneath the surface. The angle of the ship grows incredibly steep. The massive, beautiful brass propellers, which had pushed her across the oceans of the world, rise slowly into the evening air, gleaming like tragic monuments in the fading light. A profound hush falls over the entire sea. The wind seems to die down. The birds have long since flown away. There is only the sound of displaced water, a gentle rushing, bubbling noise as the ocean folds its arms around the immense weight of the steel. The young deckhand, floating quietly near a piece of wooden debris, watches the towering pagoda mast begin its final descent. He does not cry out. He simply brings his hands together beneath the water, bowing his head. All around him, other men do the same. Some close their eyes, whispering quiet prayers. Others simply stare, memorizing the shape of her silhouette against the twilight sky. She does not plunge violently. She does not tear herself apart in her final moments. She simply glides downward, a slow, majestic descent into the deep. The water creeps up her superstructure, swallowing the great guns, washing over the bridge where the captain still stands, wrapping the immense iron body in a blanket of cool, dark blue. And then, with a final, quiet rush of foam and a deep, underwater exhalation of trapped air, the Leviathan is gone. The ocean surges gently inward to fill the space where a mountain of steel used to be. A few large, rolling swells ripple outward, washing over the floating men, lifting them up and setting them down with a tender, rocking motion. And then, the surface of the Sibuyan Sea smooths over, as flat and undisturbed as a mirror. It is as if she was never there at all. The sudden emptiness is overwhelming. Where a towering city of men and metal blocked out the horizon just moments before, there is now only the vast, unbroken line between the dark water and the purple sky. The men float in the gathering dusk. They are alone now, tiny fragments of humanity drifting upon an infinite sea. But as they look around at one another, their faces pale in the twilight, they realize they have not lost everything. They carry the memory of the gentle giant within them. They carry the warmth of her decks, the quiet hum of her heart, and the shelter she gave them to the very end. The night begins to fall, drawing a velvet curtain over the water. The first stars appear, faint and shimmering, reflecting on the surface of the calm sea. The sailors rest their heads against their canvas life-preservers, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the ocean, knowing that far below, in the quiet, eternal dark, their beautiful ship is finally at rest. There is a specific kind of darkness that only falls when the mind has forgotten how to rest. As the sun finally slips below the edge of the world, it takes the punishing heat of the day with it, leaving behind a sky the color of bruised plums and charcoal. The surviving ships of the great fleet press onward through the twilight, their steel skins still warm, carrying the memory of the fire they have just endured. The ocean, entirely indifferent to the frantic struggles of the men upon it, begins to smooth itself out into long, slow, rhythmic swells. The wind drops to a soft, forgiving whisper. High above the waterline, enclosed in the heavy armored glass and steel of the flagship's bridge, stands the commander of the fleet. He is an admiral, a man who has spent his entire life studying the vast geometry of the oceans, but tonight, he is simply a deeply exhausted, elderly man. He stands near the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out into the gathering blackness. His uniform, usually a symbol of crisp, unyielding authority, is rumpled and stained with the dark, heavy oil of the sea. Only yesterday, though it feels like a lifetime ago, his previous ship had been torn apart beneath him in the freezing dark of the Palawan Passage. He had plunged into the oily waters, swimming for his life beneath a canopy of indifferent stars, swallowing the bitter taste of the ocean before being hauled onto the deck of a destroyer. The deep, pervasive chill of that water has never truly left his bones. It sits heavily in his chest, a cold, quiet weight that no cup of hot tea can touch. Now, he is back in command, standing on the deck of the largest warship ever built, tasked with leading tens of thousands of men into a narrow, treacherous strait filled with unseen enemies. But the human mind is a fragile thing. It is not made of armor plate or riveted iron. It is a delicate web of memory, thought, and electrical light, and right now, his mind is running on the very last drops of its oil. He has been awake for 3 days and 3 nights. To be awake for that long is to enter a strange, waking dream. The edges of the world begin to soften and blur. The solid steel deck beneath his boots feels as though it is swaying, even when the sea is perfectly flat. The low, hushed voices of his officers, reporting heading and speed, sound like echoes coming from the end of a long, dark tunnel. When he blinks, his heavy eyelids feel as though they are made of lead, and the simple act of keeping them open requires a monumental, painful effort of will. He steps forward and looks down at the navigation table. In the center of the wooden desk, illuminated by a single, soft red bulb, is the compass. The brass housing gleams faintly in the crimson light. Inside the glass dome, floating in a pool of clear alcohol, the delicate needle points faithfully toward the magnetic north. It is a beautiful, precise instrument. But as the admiral stares at it, the numbers in the compass rose seem to detach themselves from meaning. North, south, east, west. They are just words. They are just directions on a piece of paper. The grand, sweeping plan he has been ordered to execute requires him to thread a needle in the dark, to push his battered, bleeding fleet through a narrow channel and into the waiting guns of an enemy he cannot see. But his compass has lost its true north. The fog of war is no longer just the smoke drifting across the water, it is a thick, impenetrable mist that has settled inside his own mind. He looks at the charts, tracing the lines with a trembling finger, but the map refuses to make sense. It is just ink on paper, as meaningless as the shadows dancing on the bulkhead. This is the profound, terrifying isolation of command. He is surrounded by dozens of brilliant officers, surrounded by the hum of radios and the steady thrum of the ship's engines, yet he has never been more entirely alone. The men on the bridge are watching him. They are trying not to stare, keeping their eyes respectfully lowered, but he can feel the weight of their gaze. They are waiting for him to tell them what to do. They are trusting him with their lives, placing their beating hearts gently into his tired hands. He turns away from the table, stepping back to the armored window. He looks out at the sea. Somewhere out there in the dark, the enemy is waiting. Somewhere behind him, the ghosts of the men who went down with the gentle giant are settling into the silt. And in the belly of the ships following blindly in his wake, thousands of young boys are sitting in the dark, clutching photographs of their mothers, waiting for the order to sail into the fire. He breathes in. The air smells of salt, stale sweat, and the faint, coppery scent of fear. In the dim light of the bridge, a young aide silently steps out from the shadows. He is a boy of no more than 20, his face smooth and deeply pale. He holds a small, lacquered wooden tray. Upon it sits a simple porcelain cup, sending a thin, twisting ribbon of steam into the cool air of the bridge. The boy does not announce himself. He moves with a slow, practiced grace, mindful of the heavy silence that fills the room. He approaches the admiral and bows his head, lifting the tray slightly. The admiral looks away from the window. He looks at the boy, and then at the cup of green tea. It is such a small, domestic thing. It belongs in a quiet garden in Kyoto, or on a wooden table in a sunny kitchen, not here, in the cold steel heart of a warship. Slowly, the admiral reaches out and takes the cup. The porcelain is wonderfully hot against his cold, trembling fingers. He brings it to his lips and takes a slow sip. The tea is perfectly brewed, carrying the earthy, comforting taste of toasted rice and warm summer grass. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, the terrible machinery of the war stops turning. The warmth of the tea spreads down his throat, a tiny, glowing ember of humanity pushed into the center of the freezing dark. He looks at the young aide. He sees the dark circles under the boy's eyes. He sees the way the boy's hands are curled slightly inward, a quiet manifestation of his hidden terror. He realizes, with a sudden, overwhelming clarity, that he cannot ask this boy to sail into the dark tonight. The brilliant mind of the strategist phrase, giving way to the simple, aching heart of a father. He is too tired to be brilliant. He is too tired to be a hero of the empire. He is only human, and his humanity tells him that his men have bled enough for one day. They need to rest. They need to close their eyes without the fear of the sky falling upon them. They need the sun to rise so they can see the faces of the friends standing beside them. The admiral places the empty porcelain cup back onto the wooden tray with a soft, quiet clink. He turns to the helm. His voice, when he finally speaks, is barely above a whisper, yet it carries across the silent bridge like a tolling bell. "Helm," he says, his voice thick with the weight of the world. "Come about. Bring the fleet to the reverse course." The officers on the bridge freeze for a fraction of a second. It is a shocking order. To turn back is to abandon the grand plan. It is a retreat, a temporary surrender to the exhaustion that grips them all. But no one argues. No one questions the quiet, heavy authority in the tired man's voice. "I, Admiral." "Coming about." The helmsman turns the heavy brass wheel. Deep below, the massive steering gears groan in the dark, pushing the great rudders against the pressure of the sea. Slowly, majestically, the massive flagship begins to turn. You can feel it in the deck before you can see it. It is a gentle, sweeping shift in gravity. The floor tilts ever so slightly. The hum of the engines changes pitch, working harder to push the mountain of steel into a new arc outside. The dark water churns, leaving a wide, curving wake of pale white foam that glows faintly under the starlight. One by one, the other ships in the fleet see the maneuver. They read the dim, hooded light signals flashing across the void. And one by one, they follow. The long, staggering line of warships leans into the turn, carving a massive circle into the surface of the Sibuyan Sea. Down in the suffocating heat of the lower decks, the sailors feel the shift. A young loader, sitting against a cold bulkhead with his knees pulled tightly to his chest, feels his body pressed gently against the steel as the ship banks. He knows the feel of his vessel. He knows the difference between a zigzag to avoid a falling bomb and a full, deliberate reversal of course. He closes his eyes. He listens to the water rushing past the hull on the opposite side. They are turning back. A profound, sweeping wave of relief washes through the dark compartments. It is not a cheer. It is a collective, physical exhalation. The unbearable tension that has kept their muscles locked and their jaws clenched for 24 hours finally snaps. Shoulders drop. Heads fall back against the metal walls. Men who have not wept through the entire terrifying ordeal suddenly find silent tears sliding down their soot-stained cheeks. They are not going home. They know the war is not over. They know the sun will eventually rise, and the admiral will likely turn them around again to face the fire. But tonight, right now, they are sailing away from the dark. They have been given a gift of a few more hours of life. A few more hours to breathe, to rest their aching limbs, to dream of paper screens and warm hearths. Back on the bridge, the admiral watches the wake straighten out behind them. The ship is steady again, moving back through the water they have already crossed. He looks down at the compass. The needle has swung entirely around. It still points north, but the ship is heading away from it. He has made a decision born of absolute fatigue, a choice made by a compass without a true north. But as he looks out at the night sky, watching the stars drift lazily above the calming ocean, he feels a strange, quiet peace. The isolation of command is still there, a heavy cloak draped over his shoulders, but it is no longer suffocating. He turns to the shadow of the bridge and finds the young aide. He offers the boy a very small, very tired smile. "Go to sleep, son," the admiral whispers into the dim red light. "We will let the ocean carry us for a while." The fleet sails into the vast, empty dark, a procession of weary giants finally closing their eyes. The rhythmic hum of the engines becomes a gentle, rocking lullaby. The war waits on the horizon, patient and terrible, but for this one quiet night, the exhausted minds of men have chosen the simple, beautiful mercy of turning away, finding a fleeting sanctuary in the soft, unending embrace of the sea. There is a profound, echoing silence that settles over a ship when every man aboard knows they are sailing off the edge of the world. Far to the south, away from the turning ships of the main fleet and the fading twilight of the open sea, another group of iron giants slides through the black water. This is the Shō-Gō Strait. The night here is different. It is heavy. It presses down upon the water like a thick, woolen blanket, trapping the humid, fragrant breath of the jungle islands that rise on either side. The mountains loom like the sleeping shoulders of dark, ancient gods, their silhouettes barely visible against a sky that holds no stars. The vault of the heavens is made of impenetrable soot, and the sea below is a slow, rolling river of ink. To walk the decks of these ships tonight is to walk through a floating temple of ghosts. The men here do not harbor the bright, frantic illusions of victory. They have looked at the charts in the dim red glow of the navigation rooms. They have seen the narrow, suffocating shape of the strait ahead, a dark, tight corridor of water that leads directly into a room with no exit. They know what waits for them in the pitch-black void. They know the enemy is sitting quietly in the reeds, hidden in the dark, countless and ready. Yet, the massive engines deep within the hulls hum their steady, rhythmic song. The heavy brass propellers turn. The sharp bows cut the water, parting the sea with a soft, continuous whisper. They move forward not with the fiery, desperate zeal of warriors, but with the quiet, devastating grace of men who have entirely accepted their fate. They are already spirits, drifting over the water, bound to this world only by an invisible thread of duty, a profound love for the brothers standing beside them, and an ancient, unspoken understanding that some paths must be walked simply because they were drawn. Down in the dimly lit compartments, where the low-wattage battle lamps cast long, wavering shadows against the riveted steel, the air is thick and still. A young signalman sits cross-legged on the cold metal floor. He has a small block of delicate, translucent rice paper resting on his knees. He is not writing a letter. He is folding. With slow, meticulous care, his soot-stained fingers crease the fragile paper, folding the corners, shaping the edges. He is making a tiny, square lantern. In the late, golden summers of his childhood, his village would light hundreds of these paper lanterns and set them adrift on the gentle current of the river, a beautiful, glowing procession meant to guide the spirits of the ancestors back to the other side. Now, in the belly of a warship, he folds one for himself. He does not light it. He simply smooths the final crease and places it gently inside his canvas bag, next to his folded spare shirt. It is a quiet, deeply private preparation, a way of making peace with the dark water that waits for him. Beside him, an older machinist, a man with lines of endless fatigue etched deeply around his eyes, watches the boy in silence. The older man reaches into his pocket and offers the boy a single, hard ginger candy. They do not exchange words. The boy takes it, bowing his head. The small, sharp sweetness of the candy on his tongue, and the comforting presence of the older man's shadow, are their shared communion in the dark. High above, on the open bridge exposed to the warm, wet wind of the strait, the admiral stands like a statue carved from aged, withered wood. He is a man of the old sea, a quiet, stoic father to the thousands of souls in his fleet. He does not pace the wooden deck. He does not issue frantic, desperate orders to his officers. He simply stands with his hands clasped behind his back, looking straight ahead into the absolute, unbroken blackness. He knows the trap is set. He knows his force is the bait, a sacrifice meant to draw the terrible fire of the night away from others. There is an immense, crushing weight in this knowledge, a burden heavy enough to break the spirit, but he carries it with a profound, almost beautiful dignity. A young officer, his face pale and composed, steps forward from the shadows and brings him a small porcelain cup of hot green tea. The admiral takes it, his hands perfectly steady. He drinks the tea slowly, letting the simple, earthy warmth settle into his chest. He lowers the cup and looks at the young officer. He offers a microscopic nod. It is a silent apology, and a silent blessing, all woven into a single, gentle movement. They are walking into the dark together, hand in hand, and there is a strange, quiet comfort in not having to walk it alone. Deep within the ship, in the narrow, humid galley, the cooks have prepared the final meal. It is a simple offering. White rice, cooked soft and steaming, topped with a single, crimson pickled plum. The bright colors of their homeland, served in simple wooden bowls. The men eat in profound silence. There is no clattering of chopsticks, no anxious chatter, no forced laughter to chase away the fear. They eat slowly, chewing every grain of rice, savoring the simple, earthly nourishment, feeling the warmth of the food in their stomachs. When they are finished, they do something incredibly tender. They take their small cotton cloths and they clean their bowls. They wipe the wood until it is spotless, setting their chopsticks perfectly parallel across the rim. They wipe down the tables. They fold their napkins with precise, sharp edges. It is an act of tidying up the room before one leaves it forever. They are sweeping the floor of their lives, making sure they leave the world as neatly, as respectfully, as they found it. There is a deep, soothing peace in this ritual, a way to maintain their humanity when everything else is slipping away. The strait begins to narrow. The heavy, dark land closes in on either side. The smell of the jungle grows stronger, drifting out over the water to mix with the metallic tang of the ship. It is a rich, earthy scent of damp soil, wet fern, and rotting orchids. It smells like a lush, ancient garden, waiting patiently in the dark. The men on the upper decks begin to prepare themselves. They tie the heavy straps of their canvas life preservers with slow, deliberate knots. They check the leather chin straps on their steel helmets. They do not do this out of a frantic hope for survival. They do it out of a quiet respect for the uniform they wear and the men they serve beside. A young gunner stands at his station, leaning his tired back against the cold iron barrel of his weapon. He reaches under the collar of his tunic and pulls out a small, silken pouch hanging from a thin cord. Inside is a tiny pinch of dirt from the garden behind his family home. He holds the silken pouch to his lips, closing his eyes. If he listens closely, past the rhythmic thrum of the engines and the rushing of the water, he can almost hear the wind rustling through the persimmon trees of his village. He can almost hear the soft, familiar sound of his mother's footsteps on the wooden porch, sweeping the autumn leaves. He breathes in the memory. He lets it fill his lungs and his heart. He anchors his soul to that peaceful, sunlit place, finding a quiet sanctuary within his own mind, even as his body is carried forward into the abyss. Beside him, an older sailor steps up to the railing. The older man leans heavily against the lifelines, looking out at the black water. He begins to hum. It is a low, vibrating sound, a slow, melancholic folk song from the northern snowy provinces. It is a song about a long winter, and waiting for the ice to melt. The young gunner opens his eyes and listens. He does not know the words, but he knows the feeling. It is a lullaby for the end of the world. He steps closer to the older man, their shoulders almost touching, letting the low vibration of the song wrap around him like a warm blanket against the night air. The fleet sails deeper into the canyon of water. They are a procession of ghosts, floating silently toward the edge. Their lanterns are not made of paper and fire, they are lit only in their hearts, glowing with a soft, tragic resilience. They do not turn their ships around. They do not falter in their course. This quiet fatalism is not a surrender to despair. It is a heartbreaking, beautiful elevation of duty above the self. They are brothers, holding each other up in the immense dark, marching into the waiting reeds because that is what was asked of them. They sail on, straight and true, their wakes leaving a fading trail of pale foam on the black river, moving peacefully, inevitably, into the deepest shadows of the night. There is a moment, just before the first heavy drop of rain falls, when the entire world holds its breath in the dark. The Shō-Gō Strait at midnight is not just a place on a map, it is a feeling. It is a narrow, winding canyon of water, flanked on both sides by the towering, invisible shoulders of jungle-covered mountains. The air here does not move. It hangs thick and heavy, saturated with the rich, damp scent of wet earth, rotting ferns, and the sweet, decaying perfume of tropical flowers. This earthly breath rolls down from the unseen hills and settles over the water, mixing with the sharp, metallic tang of the salt sea. The water itself is perfectly black. Without a moon, without the light of the stars, the strait becomes a mirror reflecting only the void. Hidden along the edges of this black river, tucked quietly into the shallow waters near the shore, the hunters are waiting. They sit in small, fragile boats made of mahogany and plywood. They are not grand, towering fortresses of steel. They are simply hollow shells of wood, bobbing gently on the quiet tide, smelling of gasoline, damp canvas, and nervous sweat. The young men sitting inside these boats are perfectly still. In the dim, hooded light of a covered compass binnacle, you can see their faces. They are impossibly young, boys who, just a season or two ago, were walking down quiet dirt roads lined with corn, or sitting on the front stoops of crowded city apartments listening to the radio. Now, they are here, at the edge of the earth, swallowed by a darkness so complete it feels heavy against their skin. A boy from the vast, open plains of the Midwest sits near the edge of his wooden boat. He is used to the wide, sweeping horizons of wheat fields, where you can see a storm coming from miles away. This claustrophobic canyon of water terrifies him. He runs his thumb, over and over again, across the smooth surface of a silver coin he keeps in his pocket. It was his father's coin. He knows every scratch, every worn edge of the silver by heart. He closes his eyes and focuses entirely on the cool metal, using it as an anchor to keep his mind from drifting out into the terrifying black water. He listens. He strains his ears against the silence. There is only the soft, rhythmic slapping of the water against the plywood hull, a sound as gentle as a heartbeat. Beside him, another boy shifts his weight carefully, trying not to let his heavy boots scrape against the wooden deck. He leans close. Without a word, he reaches out and presses something small into the first boy's hand. It is half a stick of peppermint gum, wrapped in a tiny piece of silver foil. The boy takes it, unwrapping it with slow, painstaking care to avoid making even the slightest crinkle. He places it on his tongue. The sharp, clean, familiar taste of the mint blooms in his mouth. It is a tiny, shocking burst of home, a taste of Sunday afternoons and corner stores, cutting straight through the oppressive smell of the diesel and the jungle. They chew in silence, their shoulders touching. It is a profound, beautiful act of friendship. In this terrifying dark, that shared piece of mint is a silent promise: we are here together. You are not alone. Further out in the center of the strait, waiting in the deeper water, the larger destroyers sit like silent steel islands. Their engines are turning over at the lowest possible speed, just a gentle, rumbling purr that vibrates through the soles of the sailors' shoes. Deep inside one of these steel ships, a radio man sits in a room bathed in a soft, eerie crimson light. He wears heavy headphones, listening to the static of the open channel. The static sounds like the rushing of wind through dry autumn leaves. He leans his head back against the cold bulkhead and closes his eyes. He is trying to compose a letter in his mind, a letter he will write to his mother if he sees the morning sun. He thinks about how he will describe the smell of the ocean, leaving out the terror. He thinks about her kitchen, the warm, flour-dusted wooden table where she rolls out dough. He wraps himself in the memory of her voice, pulling it tightly around his shoulders to keep out the creeping chill of the night watch. And while they wait, peering out into the void, the shadows are moving toward them. Down the long, dark corridor of the strait, the ghosts are arriving. The Japanese ships glide through the water with a slow, mournful inevitability. They do not know exactly where the wooden boats and the steel islands are hiding, but they know they are there. They can feel the eyes waiting in the reeds. On the high, open wing of the approaching flagship, a young Japanese lookout leans against the heavy brass mounting of his binoculars. His eyes burn. He has been staring into the absolute blackness for hours. To stare into nothingness is a torment for the mind. The darkness begins to swirl and play cruel tricks. Every patch of pale foam looks like the wake of a torpedo. Every low-hanging wisp of mist looks like the silhouette of an enemy hull. He feels an immense, crushing weight pressing down upon his chest. It is the psychological burden of the hunted. He knows that somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows of the shoreline, another boy his own age is looking back at him through the dark. He feels entirely exposed, standing on the high deck of a massive iron ship that cannot be hidden. He reaches a trembling hand inside his tunic, his fingers finding a small, silken pouch holding a prayer charm from his local temple. He does not pray for victory. He is far too tired for grand ambitions. He simply prays for the dawn. He prays for the warm, golden light of the sun to rise and banish the terrible secrets of this dark water. An older petty officer steps out from the interior of the bridge. He moves silently, his face a mask of calm, weary acceptance. He sees the young lookout shivering, though the tropical night air is warm and stifling. The older man steps up beside the boy. He does not offer hollow reassurances. He does not tell the boy that everything will be fine, because they both know it will not. Instead, the older man simply places a heavy, calloused hand on the young lookout's back, resting it gently between his shoulder blades. The touch is warm, firm, and grounding. It is the touch of a father, of an older brother, holding a frightened child steady in the dark. The young boy lets out a long, shaky breath. The trembling slowly subsides. He leans back, just a fraction of an inch, into the comforting pressure of that hand. He fixes his eyes forward again, finding a quiet courage not in his own heart, but in the silent strength borrowed from the man standing beside him. If you were a bird, flying silently high above this black river, you would see the heartbreaking poetry of this moment. You would see two lines of young men, separated by a few miles of dark water, bound together by the exact same quiet terror. You would see boys from the wheat fields of America and boys from the terraced hillsides of Japan, both looking up at the exact same starless sky, both clutching small, precious tokens of home, both desperately wishing they were anywhere else in the world. The uniforms they wear, the languages they speak, the grand empires that sent them here, all of it dissolves into the black water. In the pure, distilled silence of the midnight watch, there are no enemies. There are only frightened human beings, caught in the jaws of a machine they cannot control, waiting for the spark. The tension stretches out, thinning like a pulled thread of silk, vibrating with a silent, unbearable energy. The wooden boats bob gently in the reeds. The boys inside chew their mint gum and hold their silver coins. The steel destroyers wait, their engines humming a low, patient lullaby. And the great iron ghosts glide closer, moving steadily into the dark, their lookouts braced against the night, anchored by the simple, beautiful touch of a hand on a shoulder. They breathe the same damp air. They listen to the same gentle lapping of the sea. The water between them slowly closes. The world remains entirely silent, holding its breath, waiting in the deep, heavy shadows for the inevitable breaking of the dark. When the sky finally breaks open, it does not sound like war, it looks like a sudden, terrifying sunrise at the wrong hour of the night. The absolute darkness of the Shō-Gō Strait is shattered not by a roar, but by a spark. Far ahead, at the very end of the narrow canyon of water, a brilliant, pale light blooms against the low-hanging clouds. It is a star shell, fired high into the humid air, suspended beneath an invisible silk parachute. It drifts downward with an agonizing, beautiful slowness, casting a harsh, chalky white glare over the black river. For the men standing on the decks of the advancing ships, there is no sudden panic. There is only a profound, heavy realization. The trap has sprung. In the sudden, ghostly light, they can see each other's faces. They are painted in stark, blinding whites and deep, bottomless shadows. They look at one another, these young boys and tired older men, sharing a final, quiet glance of understanding. The waiting is over. Then, the horizon begins to flash. It does not look like a battle. It looks like a violent, silent thunderstorm trapped at the edge of the world. Brilliant, stuttering pulses of yellow and orange light tear through the blackness, flashing in rapid succession. Because the distance is so vast, the light arrives long before the sound. The sailors watch the horizon burn in perfect, eerie silence. It is a surreal, dreamlike spectacle. They stand perfectly still, captivated by the terrible beauty of the geometry unfolding before them, arcs of glowing red tracers floating through the sky like ribbons of fire, weaving a net of light across the strait. And then, the sound arrives. It is a deep, resonant booming that rolls across the surface of the water, hitting their chests with the physical weight of a falling tree. It is a sound so massive, so overwhelming, that it bypasses the ears entirely and vibrates directly within the hollow spaces of their bones. The narrow walls of the jungle mountains catch the sound, holding it in, bouncing the heavy concussions back and forth across the water until the air itself feels thick and bruised. When the great iron ships are finally struck, they do not fight back with triumphant roars. They are already ghosts, exhausted and resigned. They shudder deeply, a sorrowful groaning of tearing steel that echoes into the night. They yield to the overwhelming weight of the sky falling upon them. They bow their heads, surrendering their massive, tired frames to the dark water they have traveled so far to cross. For a young mechanic stationed near the aft of the ship, the end of his world comes as a sudden, sweeping rush of gravity. The deck beneath his boots simply falls away. He is thrown outward, tumbling through the hot, smoke-filled air, untethered from the iron fortress that had been his only home for so long. He hits the water. The sudden plunge is a shock of cold that steals the breath from his lungs. For a few terrifying seconds, he is submerged in a world of absolute, muffled silence. The roaring of the guns, the tearing of the metal, the shouting of the men, all of it vanishes beneath the surface. There is only the dark, the cold, and the strange, quiet humming of the ocean currents. He kicks upward, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp. The air is thick with the sharp, choking smell of cordite and the heavy, sweet scent of spilled fuel oil. The water is slick with it, a thick, viscous blanket that clings to his uniform and weighs down his limbs. He wipes his eyes, blinking against the sting, and looks around. The blinding flashes on the horizon have stopped. The star shells have burned out, fading to embers before hissing into the sea. The sudden, overwhelming violence has passed just as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind a silence that is almost heavier than the noise. The strait has become a narrow canyon of echoes. The booming of the great guns is over, but the sound continues to roll down the corridor of the mountains. It bounces off the dense jungle canopies, growing softer and softer with each reflection. It sounds exactly like a great summer thunderstorm slowly moving away over the hills, a low, comforting rumble that fades into the distance, leaving the air washed and still. The young mechanic treads water in the dark. He is alone in the vast, oily sea. He reaches out his hands, feeling blindly in the blackness, until his fingers brush against something solid. It is a large, splintered piece of wooden decking, torn free from the ship and left to drift on the tide. He pulls himself toward it, wrapping his exhausted arms over the rough wood, resting his chin on the wet surface. He closes his eyes, focusing entirely on the simple, beautiful rhythm of his own breathing. In and out. In and out. He is alive. As his heartbeat begins to slow, he realizes he is not alone on the driftwood. He feels a slight vibration through the wood, a shifting of weight on the opposite end. He peers through the darkness, his eyes slowly adjusting to the absolute lack of light. He can just make out the dark silhouette of another head, resting against the timber a few feet away. "Who is there?" the mechanic whispers. His voice is raspy, his throat burning from the salt water. For a moment, there is no answer. Only the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the waves against the floating wood. "It is Kenji," a voice finally whispers back. It is a quiet, trembling voice, belonging to a boy who sounds no older than 16. "I am from the Forward magazine." I am Hiro, the mechanic replies softly. I am here, Kenji. We are together. They do not speak again for a long time. There is no need for words. In the aftermath of such immense destruction, simply knowing another human being is breathing the same air, clinging to the same piece of shattered wood, is a profound and beautiful comfort. It is a tiny spark of warmth in a universe that has turned cold and dark. The young boy on the other end of the wood begins to shiver. The mechanic can feel the trembling through the timber. It is a deep, uncontrollable shaking. The night air, though tropical, feels freezing against their oil-soaked skin. Hiro moves slowly, carefully, sliding his body along the length of the wood until he is right beside the younger boy. He does not ask for permission. He simply wraps his own aching, heavy arm around the boy's shoulders, pulling him close. He shares the small, fragile heat of his own body, pressing his shoulder against the boy's, anchoring him against the chill. Kenji leans into the embrace, burying his face in his own hands. He does not cry out loud, but Hiro can feel the silent, heaving sobs racking the boy's chest. Hiro rests his chin gently against the top of the boy's wet hair. He begins to hum. It is a soft, wavering melody, a song his mother used to sing while tending the small fire in their kitchen. It is a song about the moon rising over the bamboo forest, a song of peace and quiet evenings. The melody drifts across the black water, joining the soft, rhythmic lapping of the waves. It is a small, defiant act of humanity against the vast, uncaring void. All around them, in the dark river of the strait, hundreds of other men are doing the same. They are clinging to cork rings, to canvas bags, to anything that floats. They are calling out softly in the night, searching for their brothers, sharing the debris, offering a hand to pull someone up from the heavy water. There are no officers here, no grand strategies, no empires to defend. There are only young men, stripped of their steel armor, returning to the simple, fragile state of being human. They hold onto each other with a quiet, desperate love. Hiro looks up at the sky. The heavy clouds of the night are finally beginning to thin, parting like torn silk to reveal the first, faint scatterings of stars. They are the same ancient, indifferent stars that have watched over these islands for millions of years. They look down on the narrow canyon, casting their pale, gentle light on the oil-slicked water. He reaches into his memory, finding the image of his younger sister. He pictures her sitting on the wooden steps of their home, her small hands carefully folding an origami crane from a piece of colored paper. He remembers the intense, serious look on her face as she made the sharp creases, and the bright, radiant smile she gave him when she held up the finished bird. He holds that image in his mind, protecting it from the dark. He imagines that small paper crane taking flight, soaring over the mountains, crossing the vast, empty ocean, and landing softly on the piece of driftwood right beside his hand. He smiles, a tiny, unseen movement in the dark. The battle has moved on. The ghosts have passed through the strait, leaving behind only the quiet, lapping waves and the faint smell of burning oil drifting away on the breeze. The Shō-Gō Strait is a canyon of peace once more. The guns are silent. The flashing lights are gone. There is only the gentle rocking of the sea, a vast, ancient cradle that holds the weary survivors in its arms. Hiro tightens his grip on the wood, and his arm around the young boy beside him. They close their eyes, listening to the fading echoes in the mountains, waiting patiently, together, for the slow, golden promise of the morning sun. There is a special kind of quiet bravery in lighting a lantern in the dark, knowing it will only draw the storm to your own door. Far to the north, away from the stifling, humid canyons of the southern straits, the ocean breathes differently. The water here is not the vibrant lapis lazuli of the tropics, nor the inky black of the enclosed passages. It is a deep, unending slate gray. The wind that rolls off the long, slow swells carries a sharp, biting chill. It sweeps unbroken across hundreds of miles of empty horizon, a lonely, wandering breeze that hums a low, mournful note against the heavy steel cables of the ships. Sailing through this vast, gray expanse is a fleet of grand illusions. These are the aircraft carriers, the sprawling, floating airfields that once cast shadows across half the oceans of the world. They are beautiful, colossal structures, with their vast wooden flight decks stretching out flat and wide beneath the sky. But today, if you were to stand on those sweeping wooden plains, you would find a profound, heartbreaking emptiness. There are no rows of silver planes warming their engines. There is no frantic, purposeful ballet of mechanics and pilots. There is only the wind, sweeping across the bare wooden planks, whispering through the hollow spaces where the pride of an empire used to live. The men who sail these empty giants know exactly why they are here. They carry no illusions of victory. They are a decoy. They are an elaborate, desperate shadow play, sent north to make a brilliant, undeniable noise. Their entire purpose, the sole reason their massive engines burn the last dregs of heavy oil, is to be found. They are a lantern held high to the wind, meant to catch the eye of the immense American fleet, drawing the terrible, overwhelming weight of the enemy's fire away from their brothers creeping through the southern dark. To sail a warship with the express purpose of being sunk is a burden that defies ordinary comprehension. Yet, upon these empty carriers, there is no panic. There is no frantic despair, and there are no loud, defiant speeches. Instead, the ships are wrapped in a deeply moving, tragic nobility. The men move through the cavernous, echoing corridors with a slow, deliberate grace. They have accepted their fate, folding it neatly into their hearts like a cherished letter, bound together by the quiet, beautiful understanding that their sacrifice is a shield for someone else. Deep within the cavernous interior of the flagship, on the immense, echoing hangar deck, a young mechanic is working. This space, which was once deafeningly loud, thick with the smell of high-octane fuel and the shouting of hundreds of men, is now as quiet as a cathedral. The mechanic holds a wide, bristled broom. With slow, rhythmic strokes, he sweeps the metal floor. There is a soothing, hypnotic sound to the sweeping. A soft shhh, shhh, shhh that echoes gently off the distant bulkheads. He is not sweeping because there is dirt. He is sweeping because it is his duty, and because there is a profound comfort in routine. He wants his ship to be beautiful when she finally goes to sleep. He stops for a moment, resting his hands on the smooth wooden handle of the broom. He looks around the vast, empty room. He remembers the faces of the pilots, young men who laughed and shared cigarettes in this very spot before flying into the clouds, never to return. He feels a quiet kinship with them now. He knows he is joining them soon. He does not feel cheated. He feels a strange, profound peace. He imagines the ships to the south, the battleships and the cruisers, slipping quietly toward their goal because of the empty space he is sweeping. He smiles, a soft, private expression in the dim light, and resumes his gentle rhythm. Shoo, shhh, shhh. Up in the labyrinth of the ship's upper levels, in a small, modestly lit cabin, an older officer sits at a narrow wooden desk. The desk is perfectly organized. A small brass lamp casts a warm, golden circle of light across the green felt blotter. He is writing a letter to his wife. He holds a fine bamboo brush, his hand moving with elegant, practiced strokes. He does not write about the empty flight decks. He does not tell her that they are steaming northward simply to draw the fire of 100 enemy ships. He knows the censors would stop it, and more importantly, he knows it would only break her heart. Instead, he writes about the changing of the seasons. He tells her that he imagines the maple leaves in their garden are beginning to turn the color of rust and gold. He asks her to make sure the heavy wooden shutters are repaired before the winter snows begin to fall. He writes, I am looking out at a vast, gray sea, but in my mind's eye, I see only the small, stone path leading to our front door. I walk that path every night in my dreams. He pauses, the brush hovering above the thin, fibrous paper. He feels the gentle, rolling vibration of the ship beneath him. He knows that when the morning sun rises, the sky will tear open. He presses the brush down one last time, adding a single, final line. Do not weep for the fading light. Know that I stood in the dark so that the morning could reach you. He folds the paper with meticulous care, sealing it inside an envelope, and trusting a piece of his soul to the vast machinery of the mail, hoping it will outlive the iron walls that surround him. On the navigation bridge, the commander of this ghost fleet stands near the thick glass windows, looking out at the cold northern sea. He is a tall, quiet man, bearing the immense, crushing weight of asking thousands of his own men to walk into the fire. He does not issue his commands with a booming voice. He speaks softly, almost apologetically, to the officers around him. He steps over to the communication station. The radio men sit with their heavy Bakelite headphones over their ears, waiting. For days, the fleet has maintained absolute, breathless radio silence, hiding in the vastness of the ocean. But now, the time has come to light the lantern. The commander gives a slow, heavy nod. Break silence, he whispers. Transmit in the clear. Let them hear us. The radio men begin to tap their heavy brass keys. Invisible ripples of energy push out from the tall steel masts, rolling across the gray sky in all directions. It is a siren song, a deliberate, fatal broadcast of their exact position, their speed, and their heading. To the men on the bridge, the quiet tapping of the telegraph keys sounds like the ticking of a grand, cosmic clock, counting down the final hours of their lives. But with the breaking of the silence comes a strange, sweeping sense of relief. The hiding is over. The agonizing tension of creeping through the dark is replaced by the pure, crystalline clarity of their purpose. They are shouting into the void, "We are here. Come and find us." Down in the ship's mess hall, the cooks have prepared something special for the midnight watch. They have brewed massive vats of sweet red bean soup, served steaming hot in small, ceramic bowls. As the sailors come off their shifts, stepping out of the biting wind of the open decks, they gather in the warm, softly lit room. Two young lookouts sit across from one another at a metal table. Their cheeks are flushed red from the cold salt air. They hold the warm bowls in both hands, letting the heat seep into their numb fingers. The soup is incredibly sweet, a thick, comforting taste of childhood festivals and winter evenings. They eat slowly, savoring every warm spoonful. "Do you think they hear us?" one of the boys asks, his voice barely more than a breath. The other boy looks down at the dark, sweet liquid in his bowl. He nods slowly. "They hear us. They are coming." They do not tremble. They do not drop their spoons. They simply finish their soup in the comfortable, shared silence of men who have laid down their burdens. They are not fighting for grand, abstract ideas of empire anymore. They are fighting for the men in the South, men they have never met, but whom they love with a fierce, quiet devotion. They are the roots of a great tree, willingly letting themselves be cut so that the branches might bloom for one more day. As the deep, velvet black of the night begins to bruise into the purple and pale gray of the impending dawn, the fleet sails steadily onward. The sea stretches endlessly before them, cold, beautiful, and utterly indifferent. The men return to their stations. The young mechanic puts away his broom and stands quietly by the hangar bay doors, looking out at the water. The older officer places his sealed letter in his breast pocket, directly over his heart, and steps out onto the slanting iron deck. The lookouts climb back to their high, freezing perches, leaning against their binoculars, turning their faces not to the sea, but up to the clouds. They are waiting for the silver wings. They are waiting for the storm they have so carefully, so lovingly invited. The ships move in perfect, silent unison. They leave long, elegant trails of white foam on the dark water, a beautiful calligraphy drawn upon the ocean, fading as quickly as it is written. They are a procession of quiet heroes, uncelebrated and unsung, holding their frail, glowing lantern up to the fierce northern wind. They sail into the dawn with their heads held high, embracing the coming fire with a calm, breathtaking grace, carrying the light as far as they can before the sea finally rises to gently blow it out. The heaviest things in the world are not made of iron or steel, but of dark ink resting quietly on thin paper. Deep within the steel corridors of the decoy fleet, far away from the biting wind of the northern sea, there is a room bathed in a soft, golden light. It is the quietest hour of the night, that deep, suspended moment just before the horizon begins to pale. The great ship rolls gently on the swells, a slow, rhythmic cradle. Inside this warm, softly lit room, a group of young men sit at low wooden tables. They are the pilots. If you were to look at their faces, you would not see hardened warriors. You would see boys. Their cheeks are smooth, their hands are slender, their eyes wide and bright with the lingering innocence of youth. Some of them were studying poetry just a few months ago. Some were learning to play the bamboo flute, or helping their fathers in the quiet, terraced rice fields. Now, they wear heavy canvas flight suits, sitting in the heart of a warship, preparing for a morning they know will not have an evening. The briefing is over. The maps have been folded and put away. The charts and the courses no longer matter. All that remains now is the space between a boy and the people he loves. Listen to the sound in the room. It is a soft, rhythmic scraping. A young boy, barely 18, pours 3 clear drops of water onto a smooth, dark inkstone. He takes a block of solid pine soot ink and begins to grind it against the stone in slow, deliberate circles. It is a meditation. With every rotation, the water turns darker, richer, until it is a deep, glossy pool of midnight. The smell of the ink rises in the warm air, a sharp, earthy scent of ancient pine forests and quiet temples. It is a smell that reminds him of childhood calligraphy lessons, of his mother's gentle hand guiding his own. He picks up a bamboo brush. The bristles are fine and delicate. He dips the tip into the black pool, watching the ink draw upward into the hairs. He smooths a sheet of pale, fibrous rice paper flat against the table. He pauses. He takes a long, slow breath. What are the final words you leave to the world? He does not write of the war. He does not write of the cold ocean, or the vast, terrifying fleets that wait over the horizon. He writes of beauty. He touches the brush to the paper, the characters flowing gracefully, a beautiful, weeping calligraphy. Mother, father, he writes. The autumn wind must be growing cold in our valley now. I imagine the persimmon tree in the courtyard is heavy with bright orange fruit. Please, do not weep for me. When you look up at the clear blue sky, know that I am soaring freely within it. When the spring rain falls on the roof, know that it is my spirit returning to visit you. I am sorry I could not be there to care for you in your old age. I leave with a heart full of gratitude for the beautiful life you gave me. Across the room, another boy is writing to his younger sister. His strokes are bolder, trying to convey a quiet strength he hopes she will carry with her. Little one, he writes, you must study hard. Listen to our parents. When you walk to school along the riverbank, look at the cherry trees. Even though their blossoms fall so quickly, they are perfect and beautiful in their brief time. I am going to be like those blossoms. Remember me when the flowers bloom. As they write, a profound, heavy peace settles over the room. The fear that had been fluttering in their chests like a trapped bird has quieted. By pouring their love onto the paper, they are anchoring their souls to the earth, ensuring that the best parts of them will remain long after their engines fade into the clouds. The scratching of the brushes is the only sound, a gentle, whispering chorus of goodbyes. When the letters are finished, the ink must dry. They do not blow on the paper, they let the ambient air take the moisture naturally, sitting quietly and watching the glossy black characters settle into a soft, matte charcoal. Next comes a ritual of heartbreaking tenderness. Each boy reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, plain box made of pale cedar wood. They open the boxes, the hinges silent in the hushed room. With a pair of small, silver scissors, a boy clips a single, tiny lock of his dark hair. He places it gently inside the box. He trims a sliver of his fingernail and places it beside the hair. He closes the lid. Because they are flying out over the open ocean, they know they will not return. These small wooden boxes, holding these tiny, fragile pieces of themselves, will be sent home to their families. It is all their mothers will have to bury. It is all their fathers will have to pray over. They perform this task with immense dignity, their hands steady, accepting this final reduction of their physical selves with a quiet, poetic grace. They fold their letters, slipping them into white envelopes. They place the envelopes beside the cedar boxes in a neat, perfect line on the table. The ink is dry. The words are set. The door to the room opens softly. A senior officer enters. He does not shout orders. He carries a wooden tray, and upon it are several small, shallow cups of unglazed clay, filled with cool, clear water. This is the farewell cup. The boys stand up. They adjust their tunics, smoothing out the wrinkles. They tie pure white silk headbands around their foreheads, the cloth stark and bright against their dark hair. They step forward and take a cup from the tray. They look at each other. These boys who have trained together, laughed together, and shared their deepest fears in the dark hours of the night. They offer each other small, gentle smiles. There is a deep, unspoken brotherhood here, a bond forged in the quiet acceptance of their shared destiny. They lift the clay cups to their lips and drink the water. It is cool and pure, tasting of the earth they are about to leave behind. They bow to the officer, and then, in a single, quiet line, they turn and walk toward the flight deck. They step out of the warm steel corridors and into the rushing, freezing wind of the northern dawn. The sky is a breathtaking canvas of pale lavender, soft pink, and bruised blue. The sea stretches out to the horizon, rolling in long, gray swells that catch the first, fragile hints of morning light. It is a stunningly beautiful world. Their aircraft wait on the wooden deck, small and fragile against the vastness of the ocean and the sky. The mechanics, men who have worked all night to prepare these machines, stand by the wings. As the young pilots approach, the mechanics bow deeply, holding the pose, their faces hidden, tears silently falling onto the wooden planks. The boys pat the mechanics on the shoulders, a gentle, reassuring touch. "Thank you for your hard work," one boy whispers over the wind. They climb into the cockpits. They pull the heavy leather caps over their ears and adjust their goggles. The glass canopies slide shut, sealing them inside their own quiet worlds. The engines cough, sputter, and then catch, settling into a low, steady hum that vibrates through the deck. It is not an angry sound, it is the sound of a deep breath being drawn before a long jump. One by one, they roll down the wooden runway. The wheels lift from the deck. The small planes rise into the cold, beautiful air, banking gently toward the growing light of the dawn. They fly in a tight, perfect formation, looking like a flock of small, determined birds migrating toward the sun. They grow smaller and smaller against the vast, painted sky, until they are nothing more than tiny, dark specks, and then they simply melt into the horizon. They are gone. The great aircraft carrier is silent once more, save for the wind whistling through the cables and the gentle lapping of the sea against her hull. But deep below the flight deck, in the warm, softly lit room, the wooden tables are not empty. The cedar boxes sit in their perfect rows. The white envelopes rest quietly beside them. The ink has dried on the rice paper, locking the love, the poetry, and the beautiful, gentle spirits of the boys into the fibers forever. The war will rage on, and the steel ships will find their fates in the dark water, but the words written in that quiet hour will survive. They will cross the ocean. They will reach the quiet villages and the warm hearths, a timeless, whispered promise that love is heavier than iron, and that the spirit, like the spring rain, always finds its way home. Sometimes, the ocean breathes a sigh so heavy, it wraps the entire world in a blanket of pale, silent mist. As the deep, bruised purple of the night slowly gives way to the fragile light of morning, the waters off the coast of Samar are perfectly, unnervingly still. The sea is not a body of water today, It is a vast, floating cloud. A thick, pearlescent fog has settled over the ocean, turning the horizon into a soft, glowing wall of white. There is no line between the sky and the sea. There is only a cool, damp emptiness, a breathless void that muffles every sound and swallows every shadow. Drifting through this cotton-white dream is the weary remnant of a once mighty fleet. The great iron ships, battered and scarred by days of endless fire, glide through the fog like phantoms. Their dark gray hulls are slick with the morning dew, the moisture clinging to the cold steel like quiet tears. They do not look like conquerors anymore. They look like ancient, weary beasts, wandering blindly through a forest of mist, searching for a place to finally rest their heavy heads. To walk the decks of these ships in this strange, muffled dawn is to walk among ghosts. The men who stand watch have been pushed so far beyond the limits of human endurance that their physical bodies seem to have become hollow. They have survived the terrifying, crushing dark of the submarine attacks. They have endured the golden, falling rain of the aircraft swarms. They have watched their sister ships, the gentle giants of their fleet, slip beneath the waves. They have been turned around, ordered forward, ordered back, until the very concept of direction has lost all meaning. Now, wrapped in this soft, white fog, a profound, dreamlike surrealism takes hold of their minds. A young lookout stands on the open wing of the bridge, his hands gripping the freezing metal railing. His uniform is stiff with dried salt and black soot, but the gentle mist is slowly washing it away, leaving small, dark droplets resting on his wool collar. His eyes are deeply sunken, framed by dark, bruised shadows. When he blinks, it feels as though his eyelids are made of heavy stone. He stares out into the white void, and his exhausted mind begins to drift. In the swirling patterns of the fog, he does not see the ocean. He sees the steam rising from the hot springs of his home village, nestled deep in the quiet, snow-capped mountains. He can almost smell the sulfur and the sharp, clean scent of the pine needles. He imagines himself sinking into that warm, healing water, letting the cold and the fear completely wash away from his bones. He is so tired that he is no longer entirely sure if he is still alive, or if he has already crossed over a quiet river into the spirit world, floating peacefully toward the ancestors. Beside him, an older petty officer leans heavily against the brass binnacle. The older man's face is a map of profound weariness, the lines around his mouth deeply etched by days of unspoken terror. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, folded piece of paper. It is a letter from his wife, worn soft as velvet from being touched 1,000 times. He does not open it to read the words, it is too dark, and the fog is too thick. He simply holds it between his palms, pressing it gently to his lips. He feels a quiet, comforting warmth radiate from the paper. It is a tether to a reality that feels millions of miles away. He closes his eyes and listens to the low, rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines. In the fog, the sound is muffled, transformed into a gentle, rocking lullaby. For a few precious hours, the war has vanished. There is no sky to fear, no horizon to watch. There is only the soft, protective embrace of the mist. Deep inside the flagship, in the dimly lit command center, the admiral sits in a worn leather chair. He is a man who has carried the weight of thousands of lives on his shoulders for days on end, a burden that has slowly eroded his brilliant mind into a fraying thread. He looks at the navigational charts, but the lines blur together. The compass spins slowly in its pool of alcohol. They are sailing through a sea of pure intuition now. A young steward approaches quietly, his footsteps making no sound on the deck. He places a steaming cup of hot barley tea on the small wooden table beside the admiral. The admiral nods. A slow, heavy movement of his head. He wraps his cold, trembling hands around the ceramic cup. The warmth is a sudden, shocking reminder of his own physical body. He breathes in the roasted, earthy scent. In this enclosed, steel room, surrounded by the infinite white fog, the simple act of drinking a cup of tea feels like a beautiful, sacred ritual. It is a tiny flame of humanity kept alive in the vast, indifferent void. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the world begins to change. The morning sun, hidden somewhere far behind the clouds, begins to climb higher. The light filtering through the fog shifts from a pale, ghostly gray to a warm, luminous gold. The temperature of the air rises just a fraction of a degree, and the heavy blanket of mist begins to stir. It does not burn away all at once. It tears slowly, like delicate sheets of gossamer silk catching on the wind. Small, shimmering windows open in the white wall, revealing patches of the lapis lazuli sea below and the vast, empty sky above. The young lookout on the bridge rubs his burning eyes with the back of his soot-stained hand. He presses his face against the heavy rubber eye cups of his binoculars, peering through one of the parting curtains of mist. What he sees makes him lower his binoculars and simply stare, his breath catching in his throat. There, emerging from the golden fog just a short distance away, are silhouettes. They are ships, but they do not make sense. The exhausted minds of the Japanese sailors have been primed to expect the massive, towering fortresses of the American main fleet, the great steel leviathans that rule the waves. Or, they expected to find nothing at all, just an empty, endless ocean. Instead, the shapes walking out of the fog are incredibly small. They are tiny, flat-topped escort vessels and little, unarmored destroyers, bobbing on the swells like fragile wooden toys left behind in a bathtub. They look entirely out of place, a strange, beautiful mistake of navigation. The great Japanese battleships, with their immense, towering pagoda masts and guns the size of ancient redwood trees, tower over them. It is as if a pack of weary wolves has stumbled into a quiet meadow and found a handful of small, startled deer. For a long, suspended moment, absolutely nothing happens. The two fleets simply drift alongside one another, separated by the thinning veils of morning mist. The sheer, overwhelming disbelief on both sides creates a heavy, silent vacuum. On the Japanese decks, the exhausted gunners do not rush to their stations. They simply lean against the railings, their mouths slightly open, staring across the water. It feels like a hallucination. It feels like a trick played by the sea upon men who have gone entirely too long without sleep. The young mechanic points a trembling finger at the tiny ships, looking at his friend with wide, uncomprehending eyes. His friend just shakes his head slowly, unable to find the words to describe the beautiful, terrifying absurdity of the moment. They can see the American sailors on the decks of the small ships. They are close enough to see the pale patches of their faces, turned upward in equal shock. They are boys, just like them. Boys who have been drinking their morning coffee, perhaps writing their own letters, wrapped in the exact same quiet, foggy dawn. In this surreal, dreamlike silence, the war is completely forgotten. There is no anger. There is no immediate surge of adrenaline or martial pride. There is only a profound, collective awe. The exhausted Japanese sailors look at the tiny American ships, and they feel a strange, poignant sense of pity and recognition. They recognize the vulnerability. They recognize the shared fragility of being human beings caught in small, steel boxes on a very large, very uncaring ocean. The golden mist continues to swirl around them, a beautiful, shifting curtain that gently connects the two forces. The gentle lapping of the sea against the hulls is the only sound in the world. The admiral steps out onto the open wing of his bridge. He looks down at the small ships below him. His face softens. He feels a deep, tragic ache in his chest. He knows that the peace of this foggy morning is a fragile glass that is about to shatter. He knows that the terrible machinery of the war will soon demand that the great guns turn, and that the quiet boys on those tiny ships will have to face an unimaginable fire. But for this one, singular heartbeat in time, no one moves. No one speaks. The ghosts walking from the fog have found each other in the quiet dawn. They stand on their respective decks, enveloped in the soft, golden light, sharing a profound, silent communion of disbelief and shared humanity. They are suspended in a beautiful, melancholic dream, held gently by the ocean and the mist, waiting for the waking world to finally pull them back into the light. There is a courage so pure, so desperately beautiful, that it can make even the heaviest iron heart stop and simply bear witness. The golden mist of the morning has finally burned away, leaving the ocean off the coast of Samar completely bare. The sky above is a vast, uninterrupted dome of brilliant, forgiving blue. The sea below is calm, rolling in long, gentle swells that catch the morning sun and scatter it across the water like a million floating diamonds. It is a morning made for quiet reflection, for sitting on a wooden porch with a warm cup of tea and listening to the wind. But on this vast stage of sparkling water, a surreal and heartbreaking dance is about to begin. The exhausted men of the Japanese fleet, their eyes bruised with fatigue, stand along the railings and high in the armored towers of their massive iron ships. They look out across the water at the tiny American vessels they have stumbled upon. They expect the small ships to scatter, to turn their sterns and run desperately toward the horizon, like leaves blown before a sudden, terrifying winter storm. But the little ships do not run. Instead, something happens that defies all the quiet, logical rules of the world. From the line of fleeing, slow-moving escort carriers, a handful of tiny destroyers break away. They turn their sharp little bows around, drawing a sweeping, elegant curve of white foam across the blue canvas of the sea. They lower their heads, gather their speed, and begin to charge directly toward the mountains of steel. It is the story of a shepherd boy picking up a smooth stone from the riverbed, stepping out into the quiet morning to face the giant. High in the pagoda mast of a Japanese cruiser, a young rangefinder operator presses his tired face against the cool rubber eye cups of his optical instrument. His hands, stained with dark grease and the soot of 3 sleepless days, tremble slightly as he turns the heavy brass dials. He brings the leading American destroyer into focus. The magnification is so powerful that he feels as though he could reach out and touch the enemy ship. He can see the water crashing over her low bow as she pushes her engines far beyond what they were built to endure. He can see the thin, unarmored plating of her hull. And, most profoundly, he can see the men. He sees tiny figures in pale blue shirts rushing across the open decks, carrying heavy brass shells in their arms. He does not see monsters. He does not see the faceless, terrifying enemy he was warned about in the training camps. He sees boys, moving with a frantic, desperate grace. He sees boys who are exactly like the friends he left behind in his own village. Boys who probably carry folded letters from their mothers in their pockets. Boys who are, at this very moment, looking back through their own sights, feeling the exact same terrible, fluttering fear in the hollows of their chests. A deep, unfamiliar ache blooms in the young operator's throat. He realizes, with a sudden and absolute clarity, what these small ships are doing. They are throwing themselves into the fire. They are offering their own fragile, wooden and thin steel bodies as a shield, laying down their lives to buy a few precious minutes for the slower ships behind them to escape. It is the exact same tragic, beautiful nobility that his own brothers had shown the day before, sailing northward into the dark to act as a decoy. The mirror image is so perfect, so incredibly sad, that it takes his breath away. When the great guns of the Japanese giants finally speak, it is not with a roar of triumph, but with a heavy, sorrowful thud that shakes the ocean to its core. The massive shells soar through the morning air, whistling a low, mournful tune, and plunge into the sea around the charging destroyers. Towering columns of water, dyed vivid colors by the chemical markers inside the shells, erupt toward the sky like sudden, painted forests of glass. Pink, green, yellow, and violent red geysers bloom in the sunlight, falling back to the ocean in a beautiful, heavy rain. The tiny American ships weave through this vibrant, deadly forest. They dance across the water, turning sharply to the left, then to the right, hidden one moment behind a wall of colored spray, only to emerge a second later, still charging, still firing their incredibly small guns against the impenetrable armor of the giants. The Japanese sailors watch in absolute silence. The exhaustion that has plagued them for days seems to momentarily lift, replaced by a profound, sweeping awe. The sheer audacity of the charge is hypnotic. To watch a human spirit refuse to break, even when faced with the overwhelming, mathematical certainty of its own destruction, is a deeply moving thing. It transcends the flags they fly and the languages they speak. It is a testament to the quiet, fierce love a man can hold for his friends. On the bridge of the flagship, an older Japanese captain lowers his heavy binoculars. He lets them hang from the leather strap around his neck. He is a man who has devoted his entire life to the ancient codes of honor, who has studied the way of the warrior since he was a small boy. He has been taught that to die for one's duty is the highest calling. He looks at the small American ship, weaving frantically through the colored geysers, taking hit after hit, its superstructure bent and burning, yet still refusing to turn away. The captain's eyes, lined with years of salt wind and the deep fatigue of command, soften into a look of overwhelming tragedy. They have the spirit of the samurai, he whispers into the quiet air of the bridge. It is not said with anger. It is said with a heartbreaking reverence. He recognizes the same quiet resilience, the same everyday heroism that he has seen in his own men. He feels a deep, spiritual kinship with the commander of that small ship, a man he will never meet, but whom he suddenly understands completely. The battle rages on, a surreal slow-motion ballet of fire and water, but the outcome is inevitable. The smooth stone may strike the giant, but the giant is made of iron. Slowly, the brave little destroyers begin to falter. The ocean, which has been their stage, now reaches up to claim them. One of the closest American ships, having taken a terrible beating, finally loses its power. It slows to a halt in the blue water, its engine silent, its thin hull torn open to the sea. Black smoke billows from its deck, drifting lazily into the clear sky. The Japanese fleet sails past the sinking ship. They are close now, so close that the men on the great armored decks can hear the sounds of the American sailors abandoning their vessel. They can see them sliding down ropes into the water, clinging to life rafts and floating debris, bobbing gently in the rolling swells. There is no cheering from the Japanese ships. There are no cries of victory or shouts of triumph. The silence that falls over the iron giants is absolute, heavy with a profound, sacred respect. The young rangefinder operator steps away from his instrument. He walks to the edge of the steel railing and looks down at the men in the water. He sees an American boy, his face covered in dark oil, clinging to a piece of cork. The boy looks up at the towering gray wall of the Japanese cruiser gliding past him. Their eyes meet across the short expanse of water. The Japanese boy does not raise a weapon. He does not shout. He simply looks at the American boy, sharing a quiet, devastating moment of human connection. We are both just driftwood on this glassy ocean, his eyes seem to say. We are both just trying to find our way home. On the open wing of the bridge, the older captain steps forward. He stands perfectly straight, adjusting the collar of his worn, sweat-stained tunic. He brings his right hand up to the brim of his cap in a crisp, slow, immaculate salute. All along the railing of the massive ship, the exhausted Japanese sailors follow his lead. Men with blistered hands, men with soot-stained faces, men who have not slept in days, pull themselves up to their full height. They stand at attention, looking down at the sinking ship and the brave men in the water, and they salute. It is a moment of pure, transcendent grace. In the midst of the most terrible machinery ever built by human hands, in the center of a swirling vortex of fire and noise, they pause to honor the incredible beauty of the human spirit. They are saluting the enemy, yes, but more than that, they are saluting the very essence of courage. They are acknowledging that the love which makes a man willing to lay down his life for his brothers is the exact same love, no matter which side of the ocean he was born on. The great ships glide smoothly past, leaving the sinking destroyer behind in their wake. The bow of the small ship lifts toward the sky one last time, a final, silent gesture of defiance, before slipping gently beneath the blue water. The ocean folds over it, smoothing out the ripples, leaving only a scattering of men and debris floating quietly under the sun. The Japanese sailors lower their hands. They turn away from the railings and walk back to their stations. The profound awe of what they have just witnessed settles deeply into their bones, mixing with their overwhelming exhaustion. The world feels different now. The enemy is no longer a faceless shadow in the fog. They are human beings, capable of a breathtaking, heartbreaking bravery. The young rangefinder operator returns to his seat. He leans his head back against the cold metal bulkhead and closes his eyes. He listens to the steady, rhythmic hum of his own ship's engines. He thinks of the small, smooth stone, and the quiet morning, and the men who chose to stand in the path of the mountain. He knows that, if he survives this long day and returns to the quiet valleys of his home, he will never forget the tiny ships that danced through the colored rain. He will carry their memory like a small, precious lantern in his heart, a quiet reminder that even in the darkest, most terrifying hours of the world, there is still a light that cannot be extinguished. The beautiful, tragic, shared light of our common humanity, shining brightly across the vast and different expanse of the sea. There is a quiet breaking point in the soul of every man, a moment when the heaviest armor gives way to the simple, aching desire to just close one's eyes and breathe. High up on the enclosed bridge of the flagship, the air is thick with the scent of stale tobacco, spilled coffee, and the deep, sour smell of absolute exhaustion. The morning has worn on, and the frantic, chaotic energy of the early hours has slowly bled away, leaving behind a hollow, ringing silence. The great guns have finally stopped their terrible roaring. The ship still vibrates with the steady pulse of her engines, but to the men standing motionless at their stations, it feels as though the entire world has ground to a sudden, suspended halt. In the center of this quiet room stands the Admiral. He is a man who has carried the weight of an empire's final hope across thousands of miles of dark water. But today, he is not a symbol of imperial might. He is simply an old, profoundly tired man. He has not slept in 3 days. To be awake for that long, while constantly bracing against the fear of sudden death, is a torture that slowly unravels the mind. The edges of his vision are blurred, softening the harsh lines of the steel bulkheads into hazy, shifting watercolors. When he blinks, his eyelids feel like rough, heavy stones grating against his eyes. The floor beneath his boots feels unstable, swaying with phantom currents that only his exhausted brain can feel. He looks down at the wooden chart table before him. The map is covered in frantic pencil marks, a chaotic web of courses and headings, but it no longer makes any sense. The intricate, flawless plan that was handed to him days ago has completely shattered. The grand communication network, the invisible web of radio signals meant to guide the fleets together, is broken. Over in the corner of the bridge, the radio men sit hunched over their glowing dials, their heavy headphones pressing into their ears. They are listening to the ether, hoping for a voice, a command, a piece of news from the other fleets. But the airwaves are filled only with a hissing, crackling static. It sounds like dry leaves blowing across a stone courtyard or the gentle shushing of a distant rainstorm. It is the sound of total, isolating silence. The Admiral does not know if his brother commanders to the south are victorious or if they are already sleeping at the bottom of the strait. He does not know what waits for him just over the horizon. He is completely alone in the fog of war. He turns his head slowly and looks at the faces of his officers. These are men he has known for years, proud men with impeccable posture and sharp, clear voices. Now, they are hollowed out. Their white uniforms are stained gray with ash and black with oil. They are leaning against the chart tables and the brass binnacles, their heads bowed, their shoulders slumped under an invisible, crushing weight. They are staring at the deck, too tired to even look out the windows at the sea. The Admiral looks out through the thick glass of the bridge. The sun is high, a brilliant, blinding sphere of white-gold light reflecting off the water. To continue the mission means to turn his ships back toward that sun, back toward the island, back into the waiting fire of an enemy he cannot see but knows is there. To continue means to ask these hollowed-out men, these exhausted boys, to walk into the dark one more time. A profound, sweeping sadness settles into his chest. It is a sorrow so deep and pure that it clears away the fog in his mind for just a single, fragile moment. He realizes that the grand design is broken, and no amount of willpower can put the pieces back together. The brilliant minds in the distant capital, drawing neat arrows on clean maps, do not know what it feels like to stand on a burning deck. They do not know the sound of a ship breaking apart in the dark. He takes a slow, deep breath. The air is warm and heavy in his lungs. He makes a decision not as a warrior, but as a father to the thousands of souls sleeping and shivering in the steel belly below him. "Helm," he says. His voice is barely a whisper, yet it carries through the silent room with the clarity of a silver bell. "Come to the north. We are turning back." For a fraction of a second, no one moves. The officers on the bridge slowly lift their heads, their exhausted eyes widening in a slow, dawning comprehension. To turn back is to abandon the objective. It is the end of the grand plan. It is defeat. But there is no protest. There is only a quiet, immediate obedience, born of a relief so profound it is almost painful. "Coming to the north, Admiral," the helmsman whispers back, his hands trembling as he grips the polished brass spokes of the ship's wheel. He turns it slowly, gently, as if guiding a wounded animal. Deep within the ship, the massive steering gears groan, pushing the great rudders against the pressure of the sea. You can feel the shift before you see it. The deck tilts in a long, sweeping arc. The hum of the engines changes pitch, easing out of their frantic, driving rhythm into a smoother, steadier hum. Down in the stifling, red-lit heat of the lower decks, the men feel the ship bank. A young loader, his hands wrapped in soiled cotton bandages, is sitting on the floor grates next to a towering stack of brass shells. He has been sitting there in the dark, his knees pulled tightly to his chest, waiting for the bells to ring, waiting for the order to push the heavy ammunition back up into the guns. When he feels the deck lean to the side, he closes his eyes. He listens to the rushing water outside the steel hull. He has sailed enough to know the feel of a ship making a full, deliberate turn. The low, frantic vibration of the combat speed begins to fade. The ship is settling into a cruising rhythm. A murmur ripples through the dark compartment. Men lift their heads from their hands. They look at each other in the dim light, their faces painted in shadows and red hues. "We are turning," someone whispers. "Are we going in?" another voice asks, fragile and thin. An older petty officer, sitting near the hatch, leans his head back against the cold steel bulkhead. He lets out a long, shuddering breath. "No," he says, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming emotion. "We are turning away from the sun. We are going home." The reaction is not a cheer. There is no triumphant shouting, no clapping of hands. It is much more complex, much heavier than simple joy. It is a deep, collective sigh that seems to deflate the entire room. The unbearable, watertight tension that has kept their muscles locked and their jaws clenched for days suddenly snaps. The young loader leans his face against his bandaged hands, and he begins to weep. He does not sob loudly, the tears simply spill over his soot-stained cheeks, cutting clean, pale tracks through the dirt. He is crying because of the profound, crushing shame of defeat. He has been taught his entire life that to return without victory is a terrible disgrace. But beneath that shame, rising up like a warm, golden tide, is an intoxicating, overwhelmingly beautiful joy. He is going to live. He is going to see the rain fall on the green hills of his village again. He is going to smell the wood smoke from his mother's kitchen. He reaches into his sweat-soaked tunic and pulls out the folded letter he wrote just nights before, the letter he was certain would be his last. He holds the crumpled paper to his lips, his shoulders shaking with the quiet, devastating force of his relief. Beside him, another sailor reaches out. It is a small, quiet movement. The sailor places his hand on the back of the weeping boy's neck, resting it there in a silent gesture of comfort. "It is all right," he whispers, his own voice cracking. "It is all right. We are still breathing." This complex, heavy peace washes over the entire fleet. As the ships align their bows to the north, leaving the waters of the battle behind, the men begin to step out from their armored shelters. They walk out onto the open decks, blinking in the bright sunlight. The sea is calm, rolling in gentle, rhythmic swells. The sky is a vast, empty blue, free of the silver plains and the black smoke. They lean against the lifelines, looking back over the stern. They watch the horizon slowly swallow the place where they fought, the place where so many of their friends now sleep in the quiet dark. There is a deep, lingering sorrow in their hearts. They know that they are leaving a part of themselves behind in those waters. They are leaving the pride of their navy, the gentle giants of iron and steel, resting on the ocean floor. They know that the world they are returning to will be forever changed, the twilight of their empire now fully settled into dusk. But the wind brushing against their faces is cool and sweet. The air smells of salt and empty ocean, not cordite and burning oil. Up on the bridge, the admiral steps away from the chart table. He walks over to the small, leather chair in the corner of the room. He sits down slowly, feeling the ache in his knees and his back. He looks out the window at the long, white wake trailing behind his ship, a path leading away from the fire. The young steward appears again, stepping silently through the room. He carries a fresh, warm damp cloth on a small wooden tray. He approaches the admiral, bowing deeply. The admiral takes the cloth. It is wonderfully warm. He presses it to his face, wiping away the dirt, the salt, and the stinging exhaustion from his eyes. He breathes in the clean, simple scent of the warm cotton. For the first time in days, he lets himself close his eyes without the fear of what will happen when he opens them. He has given up the battle. He has turned away from the rising sun. But as he listens to the steady, comforting thrum of the engines carrying his men away from the dark, he knows he has made the only choice a human heart could make. The fleet sails northward, a procession of weary survivors gliding over the glassy sea. The afternoon wears on, and the shadows begin to lengthen, stretching softly across the wooden decks. The men sit quietly in the fading light, mending their torn clothes, sipping warm tea, and holding onto the small, fragile tokens of home. They have lost the war, but they have found their lives again, carried gently in the hands of the rolling, endless ocean, sailing peacefully into the gathering dusk. When the thunder finally rolls away over the edge of the world, the silence it leaves behind is so deep it feels like a heavy, velvet blanket settling over the sea. The great storm of iron and fire has passed. The roaring engines, the tearing of steel, and the violent, shaking concussions that bruised the sky have all vanished, swallowed completely by the vast, uncaring expanse of the Pacific. In their place, the ocean has reclaimed its ancient, unbroken rhythm. The wind has dropped to a soft, forgiving whisper, barely enough to stir the surface of the water. The sea has smoothed itself out, becoming a boundless, shimmering mirror of polished blue glass, stretching infinitely in every direction. It is a profound, almost shocking stillness. Nature holds no memory of the battles fought upon her surface. The ocean does not bear scars. It simply folds over the wounded places, smoothing the ripples, returning to a state of perfect, terrifying peace. Scattered across this glassy expanse are the remnants of a shattered world. They drift lazily on the slow, rolling swells. Pieces of splintered wooden decking, once scrubbed perfectly clean by the bare feet of young sailors, now bob aimlessly in the sun. There are canvas bags, heavy with soaked uniforms. There is a cork life ring, its painted white canvas stained dark with oil. And floating just beneath the surface, moving like a delicate, crimson jellyfish, is a 1,000-stitch belt, its cotton threads slowly unraveling, releasing the whispered prayers of mothers and wives into the gentle currents of the deep. These objects are no longer the machinery of an empire. They are just driftwood, peaceful and quiet, surrendered entirely to the slow breath of the tide. And clinging to this driftwood, scattered across miles of empty water, are the lonely survivors. They are tiny, fragile specks of humanity floating in an ocean of blue. They have shed the heavy armor of their duty, their uniforms torn and stained, their ranks and titles washed away by the salt water. They are no longer sailors or soldiers. They are simply men, suspended between the sky and the abyss, holding onto the very edge of life with a quiet, breathtaking resilience. On a makeshift raft, lashed together from shattered wooden beams and empty canvas hammocks, a small group of men sit huddled together. The tropical sun beats down upon them, a brilliant, blinding presence in the empty sky. Their skin is crusted with a fine layer of white sea salt, their lips cracked and dry. Yet, there is no panic among them. The frantic, desperate energy of the sinking has completely drained away, leaving behind a heavy, narcotic exhaustion. A young boy, his dark hair matted against his forehead, rests his chin on his knees. He watches a small, silver-flying fish break the surface of the water, gliding on translucent wings for a few brief seconds before slipping silently back into the glass. The sheer, delicate beauty of the creature brings a slow, heavy tear to his eye. It traces a clean path down his soot-stained cheek. He is not crying out of fear. He is crying because the world is so incredibly beautiful, and so incredibly quiet, and he is still here to see it. Beside him sits an older man, a veteran of the engine rooms who has spent years listening to the heartbeat of the ships. He sees the tear fall. He does not offer hollow words of rescue or false promises. Instead, he reaches up with a trembling, sunburned hand and slowly unbuttons the top button of his own torn tunic. He works the small, round piece of polished bone free from the fabric. He holds it out to the boy. "Put this under your tongue," the older man whispers, his voice as dry and brittle as autumn leaves. "It will help you remember the rain. It will keep the thirst away." The boy takes the small bone button. He places it in his mouth. It is hard and smooth, and as he rests it beneath his tongue, a faint, phantom trickle of moisture gathers. It is a tiny, microscopic comfort, but in the vast, burning emptiness of the ocean, it feels like a profound act of grace. The boy leans his head against the older man's shoulder, a silent gesture of absolute trust. They sit together, swaying with the gentle rocking of the raft, sharing the shade of their bodies, protecting each other from the harsh glare of the sun. Beneath them, the ocean drops away into an unfathomable, sapphire twilight. When the men look down over the edge of their wooden rafts, they do not see the terrifying, crushing depths. They see a quiet, cool sanctuary. They know that somewhere down there, miles beneath their dangling feet, their great iron ships have finally come to rest on the soft, silent silt of the ocean floor. They think of the gentle giants they loved so dearly, now sleeping peacefully in the dark. They think of the friends who stayed behind in the steel corridors, the men who did not make it to the open air. There is a profound, heavy sorrow in this thought, an ache that settles deep in the marrow of their bones. But strangely, it is accompanied by a gentle, soothing relief. The war is over for those men. The fire cannot touch them anymore. The loud, terrible noises of the world have been replaced by the eternal, quiet hum of the deep ocean. They have been gathered into the arms of the sea, rocked to sleep in a cradle that will never be disturbed. The men on the rafts trace invisible lines on the surface of the water with their fingertips, sending silent, loving thoughts down into the blue. It is a quiet memorial, held in the grandest, emptiest cathedral on earth. As the long, slow afternoon stretches out, the heat begins to break. The sun, which had been a brilliant, punishing white, softens into a heavy, molten gold. It begins its long descent toward the western horizon, casting long, shimmering shadows across the glassy water. The sky transforms into a masterpiece of bruised and beautiful colors. Soft bands of peach, lavender, and deep, dusty rose stretch across the heavens, reflecting perfectly on the still surface of the Pacific. For a brief, magical hour, the horizon completely disappears. The men on the rafts are no longer floating on the water. They are suspended in the center of a vast, glowing watercolor painting. They are floating in the sky itself. The air begins to cool, bringing a sweet, merciful relief to their sunburned skin. The wind picks up just a fraction, a gentle, evening breath that ripples the glassy water into tiny, glittering scales. A lone piece of pale rice paper drifts past one of the rafts. It is a page from a letter, torn from a notebook during the chaos of the night before. The dark ink that once held the poetic, whispered goodbyes of a young pilot has been completely washed away by the salt water. The paper is blank, fragile, and translucent. An exhausted sailor watches it float by. He does not try to grab it. He simply watches it glide over the gentle swells, knowing that even though the words are gone, the love that pressed the brush to the paper remains. The water has absorbed the ink, absorbing the fear and the sorrow, washing the paper clean. It is a beautiful, melancholic metaphor for their own lives. The ocean is slowly washing away the war, leaving only the bare, fragile essence of who they are. Then, the night falls. It does not fall heavily, but draws over the world like a soft, dark curtain of indigo silk. The brilliant colors of the sunset fade into a deep, velvety purple, and then into absolute black. One by one, the stars begin to appear. They emerge shyly at first, tiny pinpricks of pale light, before bursting into a magnificent, sweeping canopy of diamond dust. Without the glare of the sun or the artificial lights of the vanished fleet, the Milky Way stretches across the sky in a breathtaking, luminous river. Because the ocean is so incredibly still, the water acts as a perfect, flawless mirror. The stars above are reflected in the dark glass below. The survivors sitting on their pieces of driftwood look down, and they see the cosmos. They look up, and they see the heavens. They are trapped in a sphere of starlight, floating weightless in the center of the universe. The profound isolation of the open ocean is replaced by a sweeping, overwhelming sense of connection. They are surrounded by the ancient, gentle light of a billion distant suns. In the dark, the quiet resilience of the human spirit begins to hum. From a raft floating somewhere in the shadows, a voice rises. It is a thin, wavering voice, fragile and incredibly tired, but it carries clearly across the silent water. The man is not calling for help. He is singing. It is a slow, rhythmic folk song, a lullaby from the mountainous northern provinces. It speaks of winter snows melting into clear spring rivers, of plum blossoms falling on damp earth, of returning to a warm hearth after a long, cold journey. The melody is incredibly sad, yet entirely soothing. It is a song meant to calm a restless child, to chase away the shadows of the night. Slowly, another voice from a different raft joins in, finding the harmony in the dark. Then another. And another. The soft, ghostly chorus drifts across the glassy ocean. The men do not know if rescue will come with the dawn. They do not know how many days they can survive on the saltwater and the sun. But in this beautiful, suspended moment in the dark, it does not matter. They are alive. They are breathing the cool night air. They are sharing a song under a canopy of stars. They lie back against the rough wood of their makeshift beds. They close their eyes, letting the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of the ocean rock them. The sea, which had been a terrifying, chaotic battlefield just a day before, has become a vast, peaceful cradle. The war has moved on, leaving them behind in the profound stillness. The grand plans of empires, the sweeping arrows on the admiral's maps, the roaring guns and the burning steel, all of it has dissolved into the ancient, uncaring, and entirely beautiful embrace of the Pacific. The lonely survivors, drifting like peaceful driftwood on the glassy water, surrender themselves to the quiet night, wrapped in the warmth of their shared song, and the gentle, eternal breathing of the sea. The heaviest weight a ship can ever carry is the profound, echoing silence of the men who did not return. The harbors of the home islands are wrapped in a thick, cold mist. It is late autumn, and the air carries the sharp, biting promise of winter, smelling of damp pine needles, wood smoke, and the salty breath of the sea. The water in the bay is perfectly still, a slate-gray mirror reflecting the pale, sunless sky. There are no brass bands waiting on the wooden docks. There are no brightly colored paper flags waving in the wind, no triumphant parades or cheering crowds. There is only the quiet, rhythmic sound of the dark water lapping against the pilings, and the soft, collective breathing of the people waiting on the shore. Slowly, the remnants of the great fleet emerge from the fog. They glide into the harbor like ancient, wounded leviathans returning to their caves. They are a fraction of the magnificent armada that had sailed out with such quiet pride just a few weeks before. Their towering gray hulls are no longer pristine. They are battered and scorched, their steel plates buckled and torn, weeping long, dark trails of rust down to the waterline like dried tears. The mighty guns point downward, silent and heavy. The engines thrum with a low, exhausted rattle, a tired heartbeat echoing across the still water. On the decks of these battered ships, the surviving sailors stand shoulder to shoulder. They are perfectly silent. Their uniforms, once so carefully mended and pressed, are stained with dark oil, salt, and soot. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes hollowed out by the unimaginable things they have seen in the dark canyons of the southern seas. They do not wave to the people on the shore. They simply stand, staring at the misty hills of their homeland, struggling to understand the strange, surreal truth that they are still breathing while so many of their brothers are asleep in the deep. Down on the wooden docks, the families wait. They are a sea of dark, muted colors, faded kimonos, heavy wool coats, and pale paper umbrellas held up against the fine, drizzling rain. They are mothers, fathers, wives, and sisters. They stand perfectly still, their faces composed in masks of quiet, heartbreaking dignity. They watch the ship slowly tie off to the heavy iron cleats. The heavy hemp ropes groan in the damp air. The wooden gangways are lowered with a dull, hollow thud. As the sailors begin to walk down the narrow wooden planks, the true, devastating cost of the battle is finally felt. It is not measured in sunken tonnage or lost territory. It is measured in the agonizing, unbearable gaps in the line of men. A mother stands near the edge of the dock, her hands clasped tightly together beneath the sleeves of her coat. Her eyes, frantic but silent, scan the faces of the young men walking past her. She is looking for the familiar shape of her son's shoulders, the specific, gentle way he smiled when he was tired. She watches 100 boys walk by. 200. She watches until the gangway is empty, and the deck of the ship is still. The realization does not come with a scream. It comes as a slow, crushing weight settling over her chest. The quiet closing of a door in her heart. She lowers her head, the paper umbrella shielding her face from the gray sky. Beside her, a young wife holding a sleeping infant to her chest turns away from the water, her shoulders shaking with a silent, devastating grief. There is no anger here on the docks. There is only a profound, shared sorrow. The men who did return step off the gangways and walk into the arms of their families, but even these embraces are muted, heavy with the survivors' guilt, burdened by the ghosts they left behind on the glassy ocean. An older petty officer, his hair completely grayed from the voyage, stops before a waiting couple. He bows deeply, an angle of pure, absolute reverence, and gently offers them a small, wrapped bundle, the few personal effects of a boy who will never walk off the ship. He does not speak. He simply holds his bow, sharing in the quiet devastation of their universe. As the afternoon fades into a bruised, purple twilight, the harbor slowly empties. The people walk back up the winding dirt paths and the narrow, wet cobblestone streets, returning to their quiet homes. The fog thickens, wrapping the wounded ships in a protective, hiding embrace. In a small wooden house tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, the evening settles in. The sliding shoji. Screens are pulled shut against the cold wind, the translucent paper glowing with the warm, amber light of a single lantern. The air inside smells of roasting tea and the faint, earthy scent of worn tatami mats. It is a space built for peace, for the gentle rhythms of domestic life. A mother kneels before a low wooden table in the center of the room. She moves with a slow, deliberate grace, her hands performing the ancient, comforting rituals of the evening meal. The soft clinking of porcelain and the hiss of steam from the iron kettle are the only sounds in the quiet house. She sets a bowl of hot, steaming rice before her husband. She sets a bowl for herself. And then, she reaches for a third bowl. It is a beautiful piece of pottery, glazed in deep blues and greens, the bowl her son always favored. She places it gently on the table, in the empty space between them. With a wooden paddle, she fills it with a perfect mound of white rice, letting the fragrant steam rise into the cool air. She takes a pair of wooden chopsticks and lays them perfectly parallel across the rim of the bowl. The table is set. The family is together. She sits back on her heels and looks at the empty bowl. The steam twists and curls toward the ceiling, fragile and beautiful, before vanishing into nothingness. It is a quiet, devastating monument. That empty bowl holds the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. It holds the laughter that will never again echo off the wooden rafters. It holds the heavy boots that will never again be left by the front door, and the stories of the world that will never be told around the warmth of the winter heater. Her husband, a man whose hands are calloused from a lifetime of hard labor, looks at the bowl. His jaw tightens. He reaches across the low table, his rough hand finding hers. He holds it firmly. In the soft, flickering light of the lantern, 2 silent tears escape his eyes and trace the deep lines of his face. They do not need to speak to each other. They share the silence, holding onto the empty space, loving the ghost that sits at their table with a fierce, unbreakable devotion. In another house, a few streets away, a young widow sits alone in a cool, shadowy room. A small, unpainted cedar box rests on the floor beside her. Inside it is a single, dark lock of hair, and a folded piece of thin rice paper. She carefully unfolds the letter, her hands trembling so slightly it is almost imperceptible. The ink is dark and sweeping, the beautiful calligraphy of the man she loved. She reads the words he wrote in the hours before the dawn, in the steel belly of the decoy fleet. She reads about his love for the changing seasons, his request for her to mend the winter shutters. She reads his final, poetic plea, "Do not weep for the fading light. Know that I stood in the dark so that the morning could reach you." She presses the thin paper to her chest, right over her heart. She closes her eyes and breathes in, trying to catch the faint scent of pine soot ink in the memory of his touch. She does not collapse into despair. She draws upon a deep, quiet well of resilience. She will mend the shutters. She will sweep the porch. She will watch the cherry blossoms fall in the spring, and she will remember his perfect, fleeting beauty. She will carry his light within her, a tiny, fiercely guarded lantern in a world that has grown suddenly very dark. All across the islands, in thousands of quiet, softly lit homes, this same heartbreaking tableau is unfolding. The empty bowls at the evening tables. The folded letters read by lantern light. The small, wooden shrines adorned with fresh flowers and burning incense, sending fragrant smoke up to the heavens. The empire had promised a rising sun, a glorious, unbroken morning. But as the families sit in the quiet of their homes, listening to the wind rattle the paper screens, they understand that the golden era is over. The great machinery of war has ground to a halt, leaving behind only the profound, staggering cost of its ambition. The sun has set, and they are now living in the long, melancholic twilight. Yet, in this twilight, there is a beautiful, enduring dignity. They do not curse the sea. They do not scream at the empty sky. They accept the profound tragedy with a quiet, poetic grace, leaning on one another in the dark. They share their meager rations with a widowed neighbor. They help an old man fix his roof before the snow arrives. They find small, everyday acts of heroism in simply continuing to live, and tending the gardens, and sweeping the steps, and keeping the memory of the lost alive in the quiet spaces of their hearts. Outside, the cold mist slowly turns into the first snow of the year. The large, soft flakes fall silently from the dark sky, drifting down over the wooden roofs, the narrow streets, and the empty, sleeping ships in the harbor. The snow acts as a heavy, comforting blanket, muffling the sounds of the world, softening the hard, jagged edges of the grief. It covers the islands in a pure, peaceful white. Inside the houses, the lanterns are slowly blown out, one by one. The families lie down on their tatami mats, pulling the heavy quilts up to their chins. They close their eyes, listening to the absolute, perfect silence of the falling snow, finding a gentle, exhausted rest at the end of a long, tragic era, dreaming of the men who are resting peacefully in the deep, quiet cradle of the sea. Time is a gentle tide that washes over the sharpest edges of our sorrow, smoothing the broken pieces of the world until they become beautiful once again. Decades have quietly slipped away since the great storms of fire and iron swept across these waters. The skies above the Sibuyan Sea, the Surigao Strait, and the deep trenches off the coast of Samar are no longer torn by the screaming of silver wings or the heavy, bruised smoke of burning oil. Today, the sky is a vast, uninterrupted dome of pale, forgiving blue. Soft, white clouds, looking like pulled cotton, drift lazily on the high, warm winds. If you were to stand on the deck of a small wooden fishing boat in the center of this ocean today, you would hear nothing but the ancient, eternal song of the earth. You would hear the soft, rhythmic slapping of the water against the hull. You would hear the distant, lonely cry of a seabird diving for its morning meal. You would feel the warm, tropical sun resting heavy and sweet upon your shoulders. The ocean reveals nothing of the past. The surface of the water is a perfect, flawless mirror, keeping its deepest secrets locked away in the quiet dark below. But if you were to slip beneath that glassy surface, leaving the bright, sunlit world behind, you would find a breathtaking miracle of transformation. As you drift down into the cool, silent blue, the light begins to soften. The harsh, brilliant white of the sun fades into a gentle, glowing turquoise, and then into a deep, velvety indigo. The water here is heavy, peaceful, and entirely still. There is no wind. There are no seasons. There is only the slow, suspended grace of the deep. And there, resting upon the soft, white silt of the ocean floor, are the leviathans. The great ships, the sprawling mountains of steel that once carried the pride and the desperate hopes of an empire, are sleeping. They do not look like machines of war anymore. The ocean, with its infinite, quiet patience, has claimed them. It has wrapped its cool, blue arms around the broken iron and gently whispered to the steel, "Your work is done. It is time to rest." The massive, towering pagoda masts that once scraped the clouds are no longer painted in the stark, flat gray of the Navy. They have become soaring, magnificent spires of life. Brilliant, fragile corals in shades of rose, amethyst, and pale gold have bloomed across the gun shields and the armored decks. Sea fans, delicate and intricate as the finest lace, sway gently in the slow, invisible currents. The ocean has taken the terrible instruments of destruction and turned them into sprawling, silent gardens. Where young men once stood with white-knuckled grips, staring in terror at a falling sky, schools of tiny, silver fish now move in perfect, shimmering unison. They dart through the open hatches and glide down the long, dark corridors, a flowing river of light moving through the shadows. Sea turtles, ancient and slow, paddle gracefully over the massive brass propellers, entirely untroubled by the sleeping giants beneath them. The ships are not graves of despair, they are monuments of profound, breathtaking peace. If you look closely through the gently swaying kelp, you can find the small, poignant echoes of the boys who lived here. A porcelain teacup, incredibly fragile but entirely unbroken, sits half buried in the white sand upon a rusted table. The smooth glass of a compass binnacle, now clouded with green algae, still points faithfully into the dark. A pair of heavy leather boots rests near a twisted railing, slowly becoming one with the coral. The sea does not erase these memories, it protects them. It preserves the human story within a beautiful, living embrace. The boys who went down with these ships, who slipped into the freezing dark clutching their wooden amulets and their 1,000-stitch belts, are not trapped in the cold. They have been woven into the very fabric of the ocean. Their spirits have become the vibrant, dancing colors of the reef. They are the gentle currents that wash over the coral. They are the phosphorescent glow that lights the water at midnight. They are finally, truly at peace, cradled in a silence so deep and pure that no roar of a cannon can ever reach them again. Far above the sleeping ships, on the warm, sunlit shores of the home islands, the boys who survived have grown old. An elderly man walks slowly along the edge of a quiet beach. His steps are careful, his posture slightly bent by the weight of many years. The hair beneath his woolen cap is as white as the sea foam that washes over the toes of his boots. His hands, once stained with the heavy black oil of the Palawan Passage, are now spotted with age and lined with the quiet, domestic labor of a long, peaceful life. He stops at the edge of the water, leaning his weight gently against a smooth wooden walking stick. He looks out at the vast, rolling expanse of the Pacific. He does not see the water as an enemy anymore. The terrifying, suffocating dark of his youth has slowly softened into a deep, respectful reverence. He remembers the boy he was, the young mechanic clinging to a piece of shattered driftwood, shivering in the tropical night. He remembers the taste of the ginger candy given to him by a tired petty officer. He remembers the soft, wavering lullaby sung in the dark, a fragile thread of humanity that kept his heart beating when the world was falling apart. He reaches into the pocket of his coat. His trembling fingers pull out a single, perfect white chrysanthemum. The flower is fresh, its petals soft and full of life. He does not say a grand prayer. He does not speak of emperors or nations. He simply closes his eyes and whispers a few names into the salty breeze. The names of the boys who shared their water canteens. The names of the navigators who lost their way. The names of the young pilots who folded their letters on rice paper and flew into the dawn. With a slow, gentle sweep of his arm, he tosses the white flower out into the tide. It lands softly on the surface of the water, a tiny, bright speck of white against the vast, shifting blue. He watches it float, bobbing gently on the swells, carried slowly outward by the drawing current. He knows that the ocean touches every shore. He knows that the water lapping at his boots is the same water that rests above his friends in the deep southern straits. The ocean is a bridge, an eternal, flowing connection between the world of the living and the quiet realm of the lost. He turns and walks back up the beach, toward a small wooden house with a warm lantern glowing in the window. He is not haunted by the ghosts of the past. He is accompanied by them. They walk beside him in the quiet moments of his life, in the smell of the autumn rain, in the taste of warm tea, in the profound, simple joy of watching his grandchildren play in the garden. The letters written on that last night, the ones with the ink drying slowly on the rice paper, did not fade away. They were carried home in small cedar boxes. They were read by trembling hands in the soft light of paper screens. The young widows, the grieving mothers, the fathers with calloused hands, they took those poetic, heartbreaking words and folded them into their own hearts. Over the decades, the sharp, agonizing pain of those empty bowls at the evening table slowly transformed. It became a beautiful, enduring melancholy. Just as the ocean grew bright, living coral over the broken, rusted iron of the ships, the families grew new life over the broken pieces of their hearts. They learned to smile again. They learned to sweep the porch and mend the winter shutters. They survived by carrying the love of the fallen boys forward, making sure that the light those boys held up to the wind was never truly blown out. And what of the boys from the other side of the world? The young men from the wheat fields and the crowded cities, who sat in the small wooden boats chewing peppermint gum, waiting in the dark. They, too, belong to the ocean now. The sea draws no borders in the deep. It does not care for the flags of nations or the uniforms of men. The American boys and the Japanese boys rest in the exact same quiet dark, their shattered ships lying on the same white sand, cradled by the exact same gentle currents. In the profound silence of the ocean floor, they are no longer enemies. They are neighbors in a beautiful, eternal neighborhood of coral and blue light. They have become a part of the earth together. Their shared bravery, their quiet resilience, their identical, desperate love for their homes and their families, these things have dissolved into the water, enriching the sea, proving that in the end, the human spirit is a single, beautiful thread woven through us all. As the sun begins to set over the Pacific, the sky ignites one last time in a breathtaking display of color. Brilliant streaks of gold, crimson, and deep violet stretch across the horizon, reflecting perfectly on the calm, glassy surface of the water. The whole world seems to glow with a warm, forgiving light. The tide rolls in. Shoo, shhh. It washes over the smooth stones of the beach, pulling back with a gentle, rattling sigh. It is the sound of the earth breathing. A slow, eternal inhalation and exhalation that has continued since the dawn of time, and will continue long after we are all gone. The darkness gathers, soft and welcoming. The stars emerge, dusting the heavens with pale, shimmering light. The ships are asleep. The boys are at rest. The old men have found their peace. Listen to the rhythm of the sea. Let it wash over you. Let it carry away the heavy burdens of the day, the worries, the fears, the frantic noise of the waking world. Let the water smooth the sharp edges of your mind, just as it smooths the broken iron in the deep. The ocean holds it all. It holds the memories, the love, the sorrow, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people. It holds them safely, gently, in the dark, so that you do not have to carry them anymore. You can simply rest. You can close your eyes, trusting in the eternal, soothing rhythm of the waves. The world is quiet now. The storm has passed. The coral is growing in the beautiful, silent dark, and everything, finally, is deeply and profoundly at peace.